If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Screening for Pokemon. Eiichiro Oda held the piece of paper he had in his room. What he didn't tell Shinro was that he had actually already written a pirate adventure story, similar to Shin's story outline, in a notebook during his 7th grade. He had always dreamt of creating a series centered around pirates and the sea with extensive world building. However, due to the limited pages available in Shonen Jump, he couldn't squeeze his pirate adventure manga concept into a one-shot. Now, though, he had been granted the opportunity to bring his envisioned series to life. His excitement surged, prompting him to immediately start writing and drawing on a blank sheet of paper. A similar feeling was coursing through Kira Toriyama and Masato Kishimoto. Kishan headquarters. It was already May, and the company was steadily growing. The local presence of Kishan in East Asia, excluding China and a few other countries, has been steadily growing. Kishan harbored ambitious plans to expand into the USA and European retail markets, aiming to make its mark in the Western market. However, Tora's and Suzuki's connections seemed exceptionally strong, with only a handful of smaller or moderately sized retail companies expressing interest. What truly caught Shin's attention was the world of e-commerce, exemplified by the still nascent Boston Computer Exchange. E-commerce remained a novelty not just in his current world but also in his past life, with companies like Amazon and eBay having found remarkable success through this retail model. While many other companies appeared to overlook e-commerce, Shin was already preparing to seize this opportunity. Mail catalog retailing was still relatively new, but Shin was gearing up to capitalize on it. In addition to the retail companies expressing interest in Kishan, such as Best Buy and Radio Shack, Shin had already prepared for the release of the Pokemon anime, which would soon air in Japan and various other countries. His primary objective was to make Pokemon as successful as possible, recognizing its pivotal role in driving sales for Game Boy and Pokemon video games. Kishan Entertainment, featuring Shiryu and various other artists' albums, had also been distributed in East Asia, and Shiryu's songs, in particular, gained popularity in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Tora, Suzuki, and several other companies began to take note of Kishan's gradual expansion in East Asia. However, they didn't see it as a significant concern since, in their opinion, Kishan only possessed a weak gaming console, except for its collection of interesting and entertaining video games. In terms of technology, they believed they could easily outmatch Kishan. While Kishan may have had a factory dedicated to producing Famicom components, it wasn't something to brag about. Tora Corporation excelled in motor and other electronic technologies, while Suzuki surpassed Tora and other companies in motor, semiconductors, and other electronics. Suzuki even had its own cellular phone technology gaining popularity in foreign markets. In fact, apart from cars and their new video games, the most profitable venture was their robust cellular phone sales. This was why Suzuki focused heavily on cellular phones, as did other companies like Tora, as they developed their own mobile phone technologies. Although the cellular phones of the current era could only receive calls, send texts, and store contacts, they were considered a luxury to own. This is why Kishan's emerging video game consoles, despite lacking cellular phone functions, sold rapidly due to the entertainment they provided, catching the attention of these major corporations. Tokyo, Japan. On May 15, 1991, Kishan Entertainment held a small press conference, and many reporters were already on the scene. Studio director Ishiji announced to the press, "We're excited to reveal that our major anime project will have its premiere screening on May 29, 1991, at Shibuya Cinema, Ikebukuro Cinema, Roppongi Cinema, and Ginza Cinema." A curious reporter inquired, "Is this the anime that Kishan invested a significant amount of money in?" Both the studio director and the creative director nodded in confirmation. The same reporter pressed further, "Could you disclose the title of the series?" Studio director Ishiji grinned and replied, "The title is Pokemon." Upon hearing Pokemon, the name raised eyebrows among the press. TBS's male reporter questioned, Kishan seems very confident to invest heavily in screening a mere anime. How can you assure people it won't be a waste of money to buy a ticket for just an anime? Studio director Ishiji and creative director Hikaru exchanged amused glances. Studio director Ishiji then responded, we may not have concrete proof to offer, but I can confidently say that our new anime, Pokemon, is well worth watching, especially if you're an animal lover. Creative director nodded in agreement and added, not only that, you'll have the opportunity to watch the first 3 episodes during this screening. Upon hearing this, one of the reporters remarked, you've mentioned that it will appeal to pet or animal lovers. He paused briefly before asking, is it safe to assume that the Pokemon anime revolves around animals in some way? Studio director Ishiji responded with a smile, that's a great question, but you're only half correct. He paused, his smile growing, and then added, as for the answer, you'll just have to wait to find out. The reporters, having expected this response, diligently jotted it down in their notes. Tora Electronics. Kenji Tanaka, who watched the press conference on the office TV while seated on the couch, casually asked Taki, the senior manager beside him, what are your thoughts? I'm quite curious. Do you want to buy a ticket? Taki smiled wryly and nodded, saying, I'll definitely get a ticket. My child has become a Kishin fan and is eager to watch the latest anime produced by them. Kenji chuckled, as he too was interested in the new anime. He had been a fan of The Legend of Zelda anime, which unfortunately ended prematurely. Now, the prospect of a new anime rumored to surpass it piqued his interest. Suzuki Financials. Shiko mused, Kishin is genuinely passionate about the animation entertainment industry, considering they're willing to invest such a substantial amount of money. Seiki offered a wry smile and remarked, well, they're wealthy now, so they can afford it. He spoke with a hint of regret. Shiko chuckled and teased, could it be that you still regret not investing in Kishin? Seiki nodded and replied, I do, indeed. Just imagine, earning hundreds of millions by simply investing in such a company without lifting a finger. Shiko chuckled again and said, it's certainly a missed opportunity. Meanwhile, many people in Tokyo had already purchased tickets for the screening of the anime Pokemon. Tora and Suzuki observed this and couldn't help but anticipate what might happen if the anime failed to meet the high expectations of the audience. It could potentially impact Kishin's overall sales, creating an opportunity for them. Chapter 102, Conspiracy and Doubts. South Korea. While the Kishin was experiencing rapid growth in South Korea, a conspiracy was brewing. This was due to the rapid expansion of Japanese video game console companies. Although many people were dissatisfied, especially when young South Koreans supporting these Japanese companies, they couldn't take action because these companies brought significant economic benefits to the country. These companies created job opportunities and boosted consumer spending, a key driver of economic growth, as people purchased goods and services, leading to increased production and employment. Despite the people's and the nation's disdain for Japan, they still needed these economic opportunities, especially with the current president and his administration pursuing closer relations with the Japanese government, which many South Koreans disliked. One notable critic of the current president was Han Woon-sik, the chairman of the Samstar Group. That's why Han Woon-sik had already begun grooming the next presidential candidate for the upcoming March 1992 election, which turned out to be Man Won. Man Won had already gained significant influence in South Korea by openly criticizing the Japanese government. If Man Won were to win the presidential election, Samstar, along with many other corporations in South Korea, would work to push Japanese companies out of the country. Following that, corporations aimed to seize the opportunity to become the exclusive representatives for selling these Japanese companies' video game consoles, ensuring that these companies could only access the South Korean market through them. This strategy had been devised by the chaebols in South Korea. They were determined not to allow Japanese companies to thrive and profit excessively from selling innovative entertainment devices anymore. Having acquired sufficient knowledge of Japanese technologies, they had decided it was time to dominate the domestic market on their own. Nippon TV. Akimitsuo Ishizawa heard the buzz about Kishan planning to screen their new anime in various cinemas in Tokyo, and he couldn't help but frown slightly. Currently, Nippon TV held the top position as the #1 TV channel in Japan, with impressive ratings. In the Kanto region, its average rating reached 19.1%. In contrast, TV Asahi, which offered fewer appealing programs, had an average rating of only 9% in the Kanto region. Its rating plummeted after The Legend of Zelda came to an end. Now, it's predicted that TV Asahi will experience an increase in ratings following the release of Pokémon. Akimitsu was quite curious about the anime, so he bought tickets for himself and his family to watch this hyped anime produced by Kishan and TV Asahi. He wanted to see what this new Kishan anime had to offer. Meanwhile, Oryo Masayoshi had been tasked by Kishan's CEO, Shin, to negotiate with potential partners. Oryo Masayoshi, along with representatives from Boston Computer Exchange, Best Buy, and Radio Shack, were currently in discussions at a cafe in Tokyo. Oryo Masayoshi felt somewhat uncertain about whether Kishan's products would sell well through e-commerce, but he had to have faith in the founder of Kishan. Despite the pressure from Tora and Suzuki, Kishan remained committed to entering the USA and European markets. At this moment, Oryo Masayoshi was still engaged in discussions with American retail companies. Especially considering their plans to release the Game Boy and the upcoming Super Kishan SKT or SKS. Tokyo, Japan. Excitement was palpable among many people as they eagerly anticipated the new anime set to premiere in various cinemas and air on the television channel Asahi. The anticipation was electric, with devoted The Legend of Zelda anime fans eagerly awaiting the release of the Pokémon anime, which was said to surpass it in terms of entertainment. Many had already purchased their tickets, and, before they knew it, they were all sold out within a matter of days, not just in Tokyo but in various places across Japan. What do you think the Pokémon anime will be like? Will it be really good? Let's make a bet, a young man asked his friend with a smile. You're so influenced by dramatic mahjong that you want to bet on anything, his friend chuckled in response. Go ahead, say it. I'll bet 10,000 yen that it'll be a flop. The young man insisted. His friend chuckled wryly and remarked, it'll be easy money for you if Kishan's new anime has a high chance of being a flop, won't it? Hee. The young man laughed. Bunkyo, Tokyo. Todai University of Tokyo. A good-looking young man with dyed blonde hair asked his black-haired girlfriend, what do you think, babe? You got me a ticket for a kids' show. Reina said with disdain and a hint of mockery. Kenshin coaxed her with a smile, you might not know, but this is a new trend in Tokyo. He then pointed to a certain couple and added, even those two are going to watch it. Reina pondered for a moment and said, all right. But make sure it's worth my time, or we might have to break up, before snorting and walking away. Kenshin clenched his teeth in frustration at Reina's behavior, but he was forced to stick to the plan. Vicious thoughts crossed his mind, I probably wouldn't stick to the plan if I'd already had a taste of you, bitch. His eyes turned icy as he continued, you should be thankful that you're still sensitive and spoiled enough not to try that kind of stuff, or else I'd toss you aside like garbage. The reason he had invited her to the anime screening was because the local Yakuza in this Tokyo area had shown an unexpected interest in an anime connected to Kishan. Kenshin didn't fully understand why, but Kishan's influence on the local Yakuza in Tokyo was rapidly expanding, especially among the Yakuza with whom his father had connections. To blend in with the local Yakuza, he had to feign the same interests as them. Some local Yakuza in Tokyo would secretly accompany him to Shibuya Cinema. This connection was crucial, especially with his father's affiliations, particularly the Yamauchi Gumi, the formidable top gang in Japan, which appeared to have some ties to Kishan's higher UPS. I need to tread carefully in this unfamiliar territory, Shin thought. Being the son of the Oyabun of the second-ranked gang in Japan, he had to exercise caution with the local Yakuza in Tokyo associated with the number 1 gang, the Yamauchi Gumi. Furthermore, even within his father's territory, the influence of the Yamauchi Gumi was notably strong. Before they knew it, May 29, 1991 had arrived, and many people had already flocked to various cinemas in Tokyo to watch the screening of Pokémon. Chapter 103, Pokémon Premiere Screening. In Tokyo, Japan, a multitude of people gathered at various cinemas. Kenshin and Reina strolled hand in hand into Shibuya Cinema, where they were joined by notable figures like Kenji, Taki, and his family. Akimitsu, the CEO of Nippon TV, entered Shibuya Cinema with his family, and his child sported Mario's iconic red hat. Prominent figures like Shiko and Seiki secured VIP seats or front row seats at Ginza Cinema to get a clearer view of the cinema screen. At Ikebukuro Cinema, Shin, Myra, Rookie, and Eri enjoyed the show, secretly accompanied by the Oyabun and high-ranking members of the Yamauchi Gumi. Shin gazed around the audience with a warm smile, and as the anime episode unfolded on the screen, beautifully designed creatures filled the scene, accompanied by a catchy song, "I Wanna Be the Very Best," like no one ever was. The audience watched in awe as the theme played, with animated characters bringing the screen to life. To catch them is my real test, to train them is my cause. As the theme played, the screen lit up with a series of bizarre-looking creatures, and the song's lyrics carried on, "I will travel across the land, searching far and wide, to understand each Pokémon, the power that's inside." The catchy theme resonated with the audience in Shibuya Cinema. Kenji, among them, nodded along to the rhythm, while some in the crowd couldn't help but frown. Even Shibake, a film critic, attended to witness the anime's hype on the big screen, despite it being a TV show. The theme song persisted, accompanying the unfolding scene, "Oh, you're my best friend in a world we must defend. A heart so true, our courage will pull us through." The colorful creatures on the screen sparked excitement among the young viewers in the cinema. "Teach me, and I'll teach you, Pokémon, gotta catch 'em all, gotta catch 'em all, Pokémon." The anime segment concluded with a spinning white and red ball, bearing the title Pokémon displayed on the screen. Following the theme song's conclusion, the audience engaged in a spirited discussion. "What was that?" one person pondered. A young man chimed in, a chuckle in his voice. "Well, it was certainly a catchy song, no doubt about that." A foreigner turned to his Japanese friend, offering an observation, "Please don't take offense, but hearing a Japanese person sing in English has a unique charm to it, a bit rough and cute." His friend chuckled in response. Then, an almost eerie silence fell upon the theater as the anime officially began. On the screen, two creatures faced off in black and white, before the camera zoomed out, and the scene transitioned to an arena filled with cheering spectators. The commentator at the scene enthusiastically exclaimed, "Nidorino begins the battle with a horn attack." Gengar effortlessly dodged the attack, leaving the commentator in amazement, who then continued, "But Gengar bounces right back." The Gengar, a shadowy, round-bodied creature, touched both its palms together, creating waves around it. The commentator shouted, "Oh, there it is! The hypnotizing power of Gengar." The audience was captivated by the anime. After Gengar gained the upper hand, Nidorino, the rabbit-like creature, was swapped with Onyx, a serpent-like rock creature. The scene transitioned to the young person seen earlier watching the creatures battle on television. The young man clenched his fist and thought, "Yes. I am Ash." A narrator's voice chimed in, "Ash Ketchum is a boy from Pallet Town." As Ash tied his shoes, he declared, "Now that I'm 10, I can finally get my own Pokémon license." The narrator continued, 10-year-olds can receive a beginner Pokémon from Professor Oak, the town's Pokémon expert. With this introduction, the audience was completely absorbed in the anime. On the screen, Ash seemed lost in his own world, playfully tossing a pokeball while his mother scolded him. The episode title, "I Chose You," appeared on the screen. In the night scene, Ash lay in bed, visibly excited, dreaming as a Pokemon toy ball accidentally fell into his hand. Come morning, he instinctively hurled the toy Pokeball, hoping to catch the Pokemon from his dream, only to wake up abruptly and realize he'd broken the clock. Surprised, the young boy, Ash, noticed he was running late. He rushed out in his pajamas, which drew laughter from many children in the audience. Shibaka's interest was piqued. As he continued watching the show, he remarked, "So, Pokemon are creatures with special powers? This is fascinating." Many in the audience shared similar sentiments. The anime continued with Ash sprinting to the front of Professor Oak's house, where a group of girls cheered for Gary Oak. Ash and Gary had a face-off, and Gary taunted Ash as he sped away in his flashy red sports car. The cheering girls followed Gary's departing car, while Professor Oak extended an invitation for Ash to enter his mansion. Inside, Professor Oak presented Ash with a choice of 3 Pokeballs, though Ash noticed that there were no Pokemon inside. Professor Oak, fully aware, chuckled at Ash's tardiness and introduced a Pokeball with a yellow thunder mark on its button. As Ash opened it, he discovered the adorable yellow Pikachu. When Pikachu made its appearance on the screen, many young girls were captivated, especially when Pikachu cheerfully exclaimed, "Pika Pikachu!" Shibuya Cinema. Reina watched the Pikachu on the screen with great interest. Shin noticed her fascination and inquired with a smile, "What do you think?" Reina mumbled, "I want that little yellow creature." In another cinema, Rookie gazed at Pikachu with starry eyes and turned to Shin, who was sitting nearby. She asked, "Do you already have Pikachu stuffed toys?" Shin had expected the request, so he nodded and said, "Yes, I'll give one to you later." Eri, Shin's mother, also expressed a desire for one. Shin couldn't help but laugh with Myra as they both promised to provide Pikachu stuffed toys to the two of them. The anime continued, portraying a scene where Ash and Pikachu were in a playful argument. Ash's attempt to catch a Pokemon on his own ended with Pikachu's laughter. Pikachu's infectious cuteness prompted laughter from the audience as well. Taki observed his child's joy and heard his son's request, "Papa, can you buy me a Pikachu?" Taki's wife exchanged glances with him, and he could only respond with a smile. Shibaka remained engrossed in watching the anime, completely captivated by it. Meanwhile, other The Legend of Zelda anime fans like Kuku, Kuro, and Kenji found themselves engrossed in the world of Pokemon with genuine interest. "This is even more captivating than The Legend of Zelda," they thought. The anime continued, and a scene unfolded where Ash and Pikachu were chased away by a flock of Spearow, with Pikachu sustaining injuries. This left many early Pikachu fans deeply concerned. In the first episode of Pokemon, as Ash attempted to defend Pikachu and the audience's eyes welled up, Pikachu leaped onto Ash's shoulder. With the power of the rain-soaked thunderstorm coursing through Pikachu, it fiercely retaliated against the flock of Spearow. When this pivotal moment occurred, the audience cheered with renewed enthusiasm. Shibaka watched the scene with avid interest, thinking excitedly, this could be a groundbreaking moment for the anime industry. Episode 1 of Pokemon concluded, and the audience stood and applauded for a solid half-minute. In Ikebukuro Cinema, Shin and Myra shared smiles as the audience wholeheartedly embraced Pokemon. As the screening of Pokemon's first episode ended and seamlessly transitioned into episodes 2 and 3, viewers were taken on a journey where Ash caught a Caterpie and faced off against Team Rocket. Team Rocket was eventually defeated, but as they retreated, they vowed to steal Pikachu. With the conclusion of Episode 3, the Pokemon screening concluded, leaving the audience on a suspenseful cliffhanger. Nonetheless, the viewers experienced a mix of emotions as this Pokemon anime exceeded all expectations. Chapter 104, Critics' Review of Pokemon. Tokyo, Japan. Many people in Tokyo, Japan, thoroughly enjoyed the Pokemon anime, and they showered it with praise. It sparked animated discussions among young people. A child asked their friend, "What's your favorite Pokemon?" But the friend replied, "Well, we've only seen the first 3 episodes. Perhaps there are other Pokemon I'd prefer if we watch more." "You're right." The child agreed. Then another friend chimed in, "I'm fond of the bird-like eagle that glows." "Oh. That's an unknown Pokemon in episode 1. It looks mysterious." "Yes, maybe that's the one for me too." Cinema Today. Shibake. Pokemon, the highly anticipated anime that has been generating hype all across Japan. Numerous film critics, including myself, attended its premiere. I had my reservations about its quality, half expecting it to disappoint, but I was pleasantly mistaken. In my capacity as a film critic, I had the privilege of viewing and reviewing Pokemon episodes 1 to 3. These initial episodes have laid the groundwork for what appears to be for the future. Episode 1 served as an introduction to the Pokemon universe and the spirited young protagonist, Ash Ketchum. The animation quality, character development, and the portrayal of the special bond between Ash and Pikachu were truly exceptional. The action sequences were enthralling, and the emotional moments touched the hearts of both young and adult viewers. The unforgettable scene where Pikachu absorbed the power of the thunderstorm to protect Ash has left an enduring impression. Episodes 2 and 3 continued to maintain this high standard. Ash's adventures, including capturing a Caterpie and confronting Team Rocket, showcased the show's blend of humor, action, and character growth. The battles were skillfully animated, and the ongoing mystery surrounding Team Rocket's relentless pursuit of Pikachu added an exciting layer to the storyline. What truly captivates about Pokemon is its ability to appeal to a diverse audience, from children to adults. The animation's top-notch quality, the catchy theme song, and the endearing characters all but ensure the series' success. Overall, Pokemon Season 1 Episodes 1 to 3 have established an impressive benchmark for what lies ahead, and I'm eagerly anticipating Ash's journey as he aspires to become a Pokemon master. It's safe to affirm that this anime is a must-see for those in search of an enchanting fusion of adventure, camaraderie, and unforgettable moments. This might be the turning point for the anime industry, akin to the revival of the once struggling video game industry. Kishan indeed has the power to work miracles at times. Eiga Shinbun Publishing. Eiga Shinbun, Pokemon EP 1 to 3 Initial Impressions. By Atano Iraki. In a world not too distant from our own, a new sensation has burst onto the screen with Pokemon. As the Pokemon journey unfolds, there's an air of delightful discovery surrounding the first 3 episodes of this emerging series. Episode 1, I Choose You, instantly transported us into the vibrant and mysterious world of Pokemon, igniting our imaginations right from the beginning. The heartfelt connection between Ash and Pikachu is touching, and Pikachu's remarkable feat during that thunderstorm left us in awe. It's a promising start that kindled our sense of wonder. Episodes 2 and 3 of Pokemon took us on an adventure we hadn't quite anticipated. The humor and cleverness of Ash, along with the antics of Team Rocket, provided ample entertainment, leaving us with smiles on our faces. We found ourselves cheering for Ash's new friends and couldn't help but chuckle at the misadventures of the infamous Team Rocket trio. Pokemon isn't just a show, it's a journey that promises excitement, laughter, and surprises. The allure of the Pokemon world is still unfolding, and we're captivated by every moment of it. We're eager to witness what lies ahead for Ash and Pikachu, and as we delve deeper into the Pokemon world, our joy continues to grow. Many film critics had mixed opinions about Pokemon, with some offering praise while others criticized it, including Nippon TV and various other TV channels. Nippon TV, in particular, did not hold back their scathing remarks about the emerging Pokemon anime, which was still in its early stages. Their criticism went as follows: Pokemon? Humph! It's forcing countless bizarre creatures and concepts into our consciousness. What did Kishan Entertainment claim? That it would win the hearts of pet lovers? Well, our in-depth surveys of pet enthusiasts revealed quite the opposite. They argue that it appears to endorse animal cruelty by compelling these so-called Pokémon to battle each other. This, my friends, isn't for pet lovers, it's for pet haters. Other TV channels also voiced their concerns, possibly because they perceived the new anime brought by Kishan as a threat. Kishan headquarters. Shin and the rest of the team were in a meeting as an employee recounted the film critics' reviews and TV channel reports. As for Shin, he simply smiled, as he didn't particularly care too much. What mattered to him now was whether the Pokémon anime would gain popularity, and the more it spread, the more profits he could enjoy. Additionally, the fact that Kishan had already begun developing the US and European versions of the Famicom for an imminent market entry had his attention. Kishan had long been ready to take on the challenges of these broader and wealthier markets. He had already made preparations to establish a presence in the USA and European markets. As for Asia, especially the East and Southeast Asian markets, Li Han took the helm as the president of Kishan for these regions. Because of this, Shin didn't have a secretary anymore, though he considered Li Han as one, in a way. But fortunately, Myra was there to support him. Today, they had finalized the groundwork for distribution networks in the USA and Europe, even though these networks were still relatively small in comparison to retail giants like Walmart. Currently, Kishan had been steadily growing, and it was poised to expand into even broader markets. Only then would Kishan unveil their new products to the world. Chapter 105, US Major Retail Companies. While Pokémon was the talk of the town, research for the Game Boy and the SKS, or Super Kishan SKT, was nearing its end. The Pokémon anime also premiered on TV Asahi. TV Asahi's ratings saw an increase as the anime was broadcasted. During this time, Kishan had already started establishing a branch in the USA and was in negotiations with retail companies to distribute their products. Kishan had successfully secured contracts with Best Buy, Radio Shack, and the e-commerce platform Boston Computer Exchange. The time had come to gradually enter and penetrate the US market. However, due to Tora and Suzuki's strong presence in the US market, Kishan faced challenges in convincing larger retail companies like Walmart to carry their products. Nevertheless, some other retail companies were willing to negotiate, particularly those that competed with Walmart. These major retail companies sought to engage in direct discussions with the founders of Kishan themselves. That's why Shin traveled to the USA himself on June 8, 1991. He did so to meet Kishan's partners in the US market. Midtown Manhattan, New York. Four Seasons Hotel. Inside one of the private rooms, business figures had gathered while Oreo Masayoshi, a Kishan representative, was entertaining them. One American man in his 30s, with blonde hair and blue eyes, sat elegantly, sipping wine. He relaxed with one leg crossed over the other. This man was Andrew Solomon, the CEO of Target, one of the major retail companies in the USA, second only to Walmart. A ginger-haired woman with an alluring smile was Celine Hart, the current CEO of Kmart. A middle-aged man named Eric Bradshaw, who was the CEO of Toys R Us, also attended. Another man, Joe Kurtz, the CEO of Sears, appeared rather unassuming. These were the CEOs of the major retail companies in the US market that Oreo Masayoshi had managed to contact. This, in itself, was a significant achievement. Andrew smiled as he spoke to Oreo. I've always been interested in meeting the person who managed to not only revive the video game industry in Japan but gradually in the world. Celine also chuckled softly, adding, "That's true. I never anticipated that this once dying and unprofitable industry would become so lucrative because of him." Eric chimed in playfully while glancing at Oreo, "Hee. I might not have accepted Oreo-chan's invitation if my curiosity hadn't piqued." Joe, along with everyone else, shared a light laugh at Eric's use of Oreo-chan. Oreo simply chuckled wryly, concealing any irritation that may have crossed his mind. New York. LaGuardia Airport. The Japanese airplane touched down at the airport as Shin descended the passenger stairs at a leisurely pace. As he made his way through the airport, Shin glanced at his watch and promptly hailed a taxi to transport him to the Four Seasons Hotel. He boarded a taxi, and it took 30 minutes before he reached his destination at 57 East 57th Street in New York City. After paying the driver, he stepped out and saw the Grand Hotel before him. "This is truly a magnificent hotel." Shin smiled wryly as he admired the grandeur. The hotel's exterior featured sleek, modern design with its prominent use of glass and travertine marble. The glass facade allowed natural light to flood into the hotel, while the travertine marble imparted a sense of luxury and sophistication. Shin entered the hotel and was warmly greeted by the front desk staff. Then, he called Oreo to arrange a meeting at the hotel's entrance. Meanwhile, Oreo was in the middle of pouring wine for Andrew when his phone rang, causing everyone to furrow their brows. Oreo promptly answered and heard Shin's voice, to which he exclaimed, "Boss! You're here. All right, I'll be right there." Oreo excused himself and hurried to the hotel's entrance. After a few minutes, he found Shin conversing with the front desk staff. "I'm terribly sorry, boss." Oreo immediately apologized as he approached Shin. Shin simply nodded, and Oreo guided him to the private room. After a brief walk, they arrived at the door of the private room. Shin nodded as Oreo opened it, and Shin followed suit. As Shin entered the room, all eyes turned to him. Andrew and the other CEOs furrowed their brows as they gazed at Shin, and they turned to Oreo, inquiring, "Where is the founder of Kishan?" Oreo smiled and promptly introduced Shin, saying, "Gentlemen, this is the founder and CEO of Kishan, Shinro Suzuki," as he made way for Shin and offered him a seat. Everyone was taken aback as they looked at the youthful man. Celine let out an almost inaudible whisper, "It can't be. He's so young." Joe nodded in agreement, remarking, "He does appear quite youthful, probably not even in his 20s. Andrew nodded and directed his gaze at Shin, questioning, "Are you truly the founder of Kishan? This is unexpected. You look remarkably young." Eric shook his head and whispered to them, "Don't be deceived. Asians often possess remarkable genes that keep them looking young, even in their 30s. Celine and the others nodded in understanding. However, Shin, who overheard their conversation, let out an audible chuckle. Eric frowned, turned to Shin, and said, "Am I mistaken?" Shin shook his head and responded, "You make a valid point, but you're incorrect if you assume I'm that old." Celine furrowed her brows and inquired, "Truly? Then how old are you, exactly?" Shin smiled and said, "I believe there's no need to dwell too much on my age, as in business or anywhere else, age isn't of great importance." He paused and noticed Celine's disappointed expression. Shin added, "But if you're genuinely curious, I just turned 19 this year." Everyone was astounded upon hearing this revelation. Andrew regarded Shin with doubt and asked, "So, you're not really the founder of Kishan?" Everyone had similar thoughts upon learning about Shin's young age. Shin simply smiled and confirmed, "No, I am indeed the founder." Joe expressed his surprise, "Really? You appear so young." Celine smiled and added, "I think Mr. Suzuki has a point. In business and elsewhere, age is not the most important factor." Eric chuckled and agreed, "That's true." Andrew concurred and shifted the focus, saying, "Yes, enough about that. What matters is discussing the potential partnership for distributing Kishan's products." Seeing everyone nod and agree, Shin smiled and nodded as well, stating, "That's right." He continued with a smile, "As you may already know, Tora and Suzuki have hindered Kishan's entry into the USA market due to their fear of our company." Celine acknowledged this, saying, "Indeed, it's quite apparent. However, these two Japanese companies are sorely mistaken if they believe they can control everything and everyone. Andrew nodded and looked at Shin, commenting, Kishan has outperformed Tora and Suzuki in the video game sector, not only in Japan but across Asia, despite your company's console being less powerful. Eric and Joe agreed, with Eric looking at Shin and remarking, that's a fact. It clearly illustrates the influence and potential of your products and video games among the people of Asia. Joe nodded as well, but he, along with his colleagues, suddenly became more serious. Joe spoke with a determined expression, and his peers shared similar thoughts. Joe said, looking at Shin, but, we're talking about Asia. Andrew also nodded seriously, saying, indeed. The US and Asian markets are different. Americans tend to favor high-quality products like Tora and Suzuki's 16-bit systems over Kishan's outdated 8-bit. Celine agreed with those sentiments. Shin smiled, fully expecting this response. It was true after all. The 8-bit era was considered outdated, and the 16-bit era was on the rise. However, Shin had already prepared for the 16-bit market and had a small team researching 32-bit technology. Upon establishing a presence in the US market, he intended to seize the opportunity to recruit researchers in the budding Silicon Valley. Chapter 106, Partnership. Midtown Manhattan, New York. Four Seasons Hotel. Shin smiled at the words of the CEOs of the US retail companies. He poured a glass of wine and swirled it calmly, while the CEOs of the retail companies watched Shin with great interest. So, how can you assure us that your products will outperform Tora and Suzuki in the US market, despite your console having lower specs? Andrew asked with a smile as he sipped his wine. Everyone gazed at Shin with curiosity. Oreo Masayoshi also fixed his gaze on Shin, wondering how his young boss would handle this situation. Shin simply smiled at their questions and replied calmly, indeed, Kishan has lower specifications compared to the 16-bit Tora and Suzuki, but our company has something unique to offer that those two giants do not. Andrew and his peers exchanged glances. Celine fixed her gaze on Shin and asked with curiosity, oh? Is there something Kishan offers that Tora and Suzuki don't? Andrew smiled and remarked, interesting. He paused and inquired, I wonder what it is. Shin returned the smile and nodded, saying, Kishan boasts an extensive and high-quality video game library, surpassing that of Tora and Suzuki. Upon hearing this, Andrew and his peers glanced at each other. Andrew chuckled and commented, I expected as much. His peers also smiled at Shin's words, and Celine added, your company has indeed outperformed Tora and Suzuki in video games, especially in the Asian market. However, it remains uncertain whether Kishan's video games will gain the same popularity in the US market. Joe nodded in agreement, saying, that's true. Americans tend to prioritize product quality. Shin maintained his smile and nodded, saying, you're absolutely right, but shortly after launching the US version of Famicom here, our company is already preparing for the release of the 16-bit console. When everyone heard this, they were taken aback and looked at Shin in surprise for sharing such information. Andrew exclaimed, you're willing to share this information with us? Celine was also surprised, but she began, even if that's the case, I don't think that's enough for us. Before she could finish her sentence, Shin interjected with a smile, we won't just release a 16-bit console, but Kishan will also introduce an incredible portable console that will undoubtedly be a bestseller. I can guarantee you that. Celine inquired with curiosity, a portable console that will sell well. Eric chuckled and remarked, you're quite vague, young man. Shin spoke up, sensing their growing curiosity, especially Andrew's piqued interest. This console will be initially launched in Japan before we introduce it to other foreign markets, he stated with a smile, taking a sip of his wine. Andrew furrowed his brows while looking at Shin and commented, You're making me feel like we're taking a gamble here, he chuckled as he said so. Celine added with a smile, Mr. Suzuki, your words and tone exude vagueness, yet there's an air of certainty. It's accompanied by risks, and I must say, I like it. Joe smiled and remarked, in business, having some risk means it could either result in an epic failure or an epic success. Eric chuckled as he gazed at Shin and said, I appreciate the way you're handling this, young man. He followed with a question, but even if your products outperform Tora and Suzuki, do you have a superstar endorsement, like Michael Jackson or Whitney? The others chuckled at that, and Shin replied with a smile, don't worry about that. I've already been planning on how to match the shining stars of these celebrities. Oh, really? Andrew chuckled and stated with a smile, I like the confidence. Celine nodded and added, the riskier it is, the more tempting it becomes somehow. Andrew and the others nodded, and Andrew continued, indeed. I suppose there's no harm in becoming your partner, Mr. Suzuki. This statement surprised everyone when they heard it. After making that decision, Andrew turned to Shin and said, Target, the retail company, will agree to partner with Kishan and take on the distribution of Kishan products. We're willing to invest and take the risk to market your products if they truly have potential in the US market. The others exchanged thoughtful glances, and Celine ultimately made her decision. Celine nodded and declared, as the CEO of Kmart, I'm willing to partner with Kishan and distribute its products. Seeing Celine's agreement, Eric and Joe also followed suit. Just as Shin smiled, Andrew suddenly interjected, listen, Mr. Suzuki, we're willing to risk upsetting Tora and Suzuki as a token of our appreciation for you traveling all the way from Japan to the USA for this meeting. However, if your so-called incredible portable console turns out to be a failure, Target will have to reconsider our partnership with you. Celine and the others nodded in agreement. Shin continued to smile and reassured them, don't worry, guys. He paused to take a sip of his wine and added with a hint of merriment, besides, if my Famicom and video games become a hit in the US market, there won't be a need to fret over whether the portable console flops or not. He chuckled. Upon hearing this, Andrew and the others also chuckled, and Andrew remarked, I suppose you're right, as he looked at Shin. Celine and the others regarded Shin with amusement and offered their congratulations to Kishan for the partnership. After that, they engaged in light conversation while enjoying wine and French cuisine. In the luxurious hotel room, early in the morning, Shin woke up in the wide and comfortable bed. Shin received assistance from the concierge as he made his way to the hotel's luxurious restaurant for breakfast. He spotted Oreo Masayoshi waiting for him at the restaurant and invited him to join for the meal. Shin inquired while observing Oreo's refined dining etiquette, Mr. Masayoshi, how do you feel about taking on the role of Kishan's USA branch president? Oreo was taken aback by the proposition, almost choking on his food. He exclaimed and stammered in surprise, President of Kishan's USA branch? Shin motioned for him to lower his voice, considering the other diners in the restaurant. Oreo nodded and replied with a wry smile, young boss, this is the USA, and if I work here, I'll be quite far from my family. Shin furrowed his brow and asked, so, you're not interested? Oreo quickly shook his head and assured, no, I am interested. Shin's furrowed brow relaxed as he suggested, then bring your family here. Oreo hurriedly nodded, and he concurred, maybe you're right. While saying this, he anticipated the reactions of his Kishan colleagues who had often teased him about losing out in the Tetris rights negotiation. Following that, Shin asked Oreo, Mr. Masayoshi, could you handle a task for me? Oreo, in a good mood, inquired, of course, young boss, what is it? Shin nodded and explained, could you find out if there are any struggling singers in Hollywood right now? Oreo was somewhat surprised by the request, then he responded, from my perspective, there are plenty of struggling artists, especially actors and actresses in Hollywood. The competition is fierce, and many people are striving in the entertainment industry. He considered the situation and continued, I assume there are many singers trying to make a name for themselves in Hollywood, but it's not easy, considering names like Michael Jackson, Whitney, Madonna, and others dominate the billboard. Shin nodded, handed Oreo a piece of paper, and added thoughtfully, "Look for an artist with these specific qualities." Oreo accepted the paper, examined it thoughtfully, and, though curious about Shin's intentions, didn't inquire further. Chapter 107, Liam Faith. New York. Soho neighborhood of Manhattan. Located at 326 Spring Street in New York, you'll find the Ear Inn. This charming establishment offers a selection of beers and delectable bar bites, drawing in a lively crowd. Amidst the animated conversation, Shin occupied a particular seat, sipping his beer while eagerly gazing at the stage. "This must be the place Masayoshi mentioned," Shin mused, glancing at his watch. Oreo Masayoshi had recommended this inn, where an aspiring Hollywood artist had taken up singing. After a few minutes, the stage host introduced, "Ladies and gentlemen, our MC is ready to serenade us. Please welcome Liam Faith." With this introduction, a handsome blonde man strolled confidently to the stage, eliciting cheers from the crowd. Someone in the audience shouted, "Sing us a Bart Howard classic." The host chuckled and turned to Liam, saying, "Our patrons are eager, so make it a good one." With that, he handed the microphone to Liam. Liam took hold of the microphone, offering a small smile, and remarked, "All right, I'll sing Fly Me to the Moon by Bart Howard for you all." The patrons erupted in cheers, with enthusiastic shouts of "Yet!" and "Woo!" along with encouraging words like, "You've got this, Liam." Liam chuckled, replying, "Don't worry." Subsequently, Liam seated himself and cradled a guitar in his arms. Meanwhile, Shin, observing from a distance, held his chin with keen interest. With a gentle strum of his guitar, Liam began to sing, "Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on a Jupiter and Mars." Liam's voice was a harmonious blend of tranquility and charm, noticeably quieting the previously boisterous crowd as they engaged in hushed conversations. He continued his melodic rendition, singing, "In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me." Liam's performance even inspired some couples in the audience to join in, singing together in a romantic mood. A whistle pierced the air as a couple shared a kiss, earning them an appreciative response from the onlookers. While Shin, his chin cradled in thought, was lost in the music, he was suddenly approached by an alluring woman who purred, "You seem a bit lonely, handsome." Shin jolted from his reverie to find a striking red-haired woman with a captivating visage. His brow furrowed in response, but the woman continued to smile, cooing, "Could you use some company?" Shin shook his head with a discerning frown, replying, "No, I'm perfectly fine on my own." The woman couldn't help but chuckle at Shin's reaction, finding his shyness endearing. She moved to sit beside him and whispered, "I understand, after all, you're a foreigner." Shin's frown deepened, and he distanced himself from her, asserting, "I'm sorry. I'm married." The woman simply smiled and casually fibbed, "It doesn't matter. I have a boyfriend." Shin's frown turned more determined as he stated, "Can you please leave? I'd like to be alone." Observing Shin's increasingly displeased expression, the woman herself frowned and retorted, "Tisk. Just because you're handsome doesn't mean you can be." Shin cut her off, insisting, "Just go." The woman snorted and walked away, disappearing into the distance. A few minutes later, Shin noticed that Liam was preparing to conclude his song. Seizing the moment, Shin rose from his seat and, as the final notes of Liam's song faded, he raised his hand. This unexpected action caught Liam's attention and elicited surprise from those around them. Liam playfully inquired, "Well, it seems this gentleman has a request. Would you like me to fix you a drink?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, possibly because of Shin's Asian appearance, leading some to assume he might not be familiar with the customs. They were partially correct, and Shin offered a wry smile as he called out, "May I sing a song?" His intention was to perform a heartfelt ballad to capture Liam's interest, and it was also one of his favorite songs from a past life. However, the bar's patrons gazed at Shin with a hint of surprise, while one of them remarked, "Haha, looks like Mr. Chinese wants to give singing a try." The red-haired woman joined in, laughing derisively, and someone else chimed in with, "Well, isn't this interesting?" Shin noticed the light mockery but chose not to take it to heart, considering he was in an unfamiliar place. His desire to sing stemmed from the fact that the song was his favorite and that Oreo had mentioned Liam's prideful nature, making it a challenge to persuade him. Liam chuckled and asked, "You want to sing?" Eagerly, Shin nodded and approached the stage, glancing at the piano. "I'm going to use the piano," he declared. Liam, amused by the situation, nodded in agreement. He invited Shin onto the stage and, while assisting Shin to take a seat in front of the piano, said, "Come on, let's give our friend a round of applause." The patrons clapped playfully, but there was an underlying tone of mockery in their applause. One of the men turned to his friend and quipped, "Get your camera. Let's capture the embarrassing moment of our Korean friend." His friend nodded and took out his Suzuki camera, focusing it on Shin as he prepared to perform. Liam, standing on the stage, chuckled and gestured for the crowd to cease their applause. As their applause subsided, Liam announced, "All right, let's hear our friend sing." Shin gingerly tested the piano, drawing some chuckles from the audience, who assumed he might not be familiar with the instrument. But then, Shin halted his testing and began to play the piano with a deep sense of focus and skill. The crowd, the red-haired woman, and even Liam were taken aback by the unexpected display of Shin's piano prowess. A simple yet haunting melody filled the room as Shin began to sing with a touch of melancholy, "I walked across an empty land." He continued, hitting particular piano notes as he sang, "I knew the pathway like the back of my hand. I felt the earth beneath my feet, sat by the river, and it made me complete." This time, everyone was utterly taken aback as Shin showcased his singing ability, which not only sounded good but also felt like a pleasant surprise to their ears. They hadn't even fully processed the revelation when Shin hastily continued, "Oh, simple thing, where have you gone?" Shin sang, his voice filled with emotion, "I'm getting old, and I need something to rely on." His voice carried a sense of yearning as he continued, "So, tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired, and I need somewhere to begin." As Shin passionately sang on the stage, the audience was captivated, and he intensified his piano playing. Soon, he sang on, "I came across a fallen tree. I felt the branches of it looking at me." There was a touch of remorse in his voice as he continued, "Is this the place we used to love? Is this the place that I've been dreaming of?" Tears welled up in the eyes of some listeners, even the red-haired woman, who had been nursing her drink, found herself deeply moved. She had recently experienced a breakup, and Shin's singing resonated with her. "Oh, simple thing, where have you gone?" Shin sang, his eyes reflecting complexity. "I'm getting old, and I need something to rely on," he hurriedly continued, "so, tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired, and I need somewhere to begin." Liam gazed at Shin, a touch dumbfounded, as he found himself becoming emotionally attached to the song, even though Shin hadn't finished it yet. Unconsciously, he began strumming his guitar in tune with Shin's singing. Shin pressed on with his heartfelt performance, seemingly undisturbed by Liam's guitar accompaniment. "And if you have a minute, why don't we go talk about it somewhere only we know?" Shin's voice held a sense of longing, as he continued, "This could be the end of everything. So, why don't we go somewhere only we know? Somewhere only we know." Liam's guitar playing seamlessly merged with the song, adding depth and emotion to the performance. "Oh, simple thing, where have you gone?" Shin continued, his voice brimming with melancholy. "I'm getting old, and I need something to rely on." With urgency, he continued, "So, tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired, and I need somewhere to begin. He hurriedly sang with an increasing pace. And if you have a minute, why don't we go? Talk about it somewhere only we know. Shin quickened his tempo once more. This could be the end of everything. So, why don't we go? So, why don't we go? He deepened his voice, pouring emotion into the final notes. Ooh, oh oh. Ah, oh. Shin gradually eased the intensity of his piano playing as he sang with melancholy and calmness. This could be the end of everything. So, why don't we go somewhere only we know? Somewhere only we know. Somewhere only we know. As Shin finished his performance, the crowd looked at him with complex emotions, their hearts stirred by the song's power. Some wiped away their tears and stood up to offer an enthusiastic round of applause. The red-haired woman remained silent, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions, a curious look in her gaze as she observed Shin. The venue resounded with applause, and Liam regarded Shin with a mix of curiosity and admiration, pondering, who is this man? How did I not know of such a song? Meanwhile, the man who had asked his friend to record everything eagerly inquired, did you capture it all? His friend nodded with haste. After the applause, a member of the crowd excitedly requested, more. Yet. Please, sing more, maestro. Shin smiled wryly as he distanced himself from the microphone, and Liam approached him with a friendly smile. Liam asked, young man, they want more. How will you respond? Ignoring the crowd, Shin looked directly at Liam and stated, I'm actually here for you, Mr. Faith. Liam was taken aback, and without the microphone, he questioned, for me? Shin nodded and smiled, saying, would you like to perform the song I just sang? Liam eagerly nodded and replied, absolutely, I'd love to. Shin continued with a smile, how about joining my talent agency? Would you like to be on the same level as other top superstars featured in Billboard magazine? Liam was stunned by the proposition, and Shin casually added, that is, if you want to. Liam looked at Shin with a sense of shock and then hesitantly responded, of course, I'd want to. Shin smiled and, despite the cheering and noise from the crowd, said, then become a talent in my company. I hope you don't mind the protagonist singing. Chapter 104 is fixed. If we secure the top 3 positions, the next update at 12 am UTC+08 will feature the usual 3 chapters. However, if we manage to claim the top 1 spot, we'll add an extra +2 chapters. Just as I mentioned, whether we maintain a ranking of 1 or 3, there will be a total of 3 chapters released daily. Chapter 108, Viral. Manhattan, New York. Kishan Entertainment Recording Studio. Indeed, Kishan has acquired a studio in New York to groom their talents. Liam gazed at the unassuming studio, then turned to Shin and asked, can you truly make me a star? Shin chuckled and nodded, haven't you heard my music? Liam acknowledged, but he expressed doubt, the song was great, but can it really land me on the Billboard magazine list? Shin grinned and gave Liam's shoulder a reassuring pat, just have faith in me. Liam could only nod and followed Shin into the studio. The studio was rather small, and as they entered, Liam followed Shin into the recording room. Inside, Liam noticed several people already present. One of them was a woman, and the other 2 men had a rock star aesthetic, with bold makeup accentuating their features. These individuals were the talents that Shin had scouted alongside Oryo Masayoshi. They were the ones slated to perform the hit songs from Shin's previous life. The young woman introduced herself as Daisy Willis, while the man with long hair and a black jacket was Stanley Clark, and the other, who shared a similar style with Stanley, was Rory Evans. Stanley greeted Shin with enthusiasm as he entered with Liam, and Shin introduced Liam to the group, receiving nods in response. Shin handed a stack of papers to Liam, saying, Mr. Faith, these are ballad-style songs that might suit your taste, as he presented the lyrics of songs famous in his previous life. Liam accepted the papers with curiosity, remarking, oh. Mr. Suzuki appears to be treating the newcomer to some exceptional music, Stanley chuckled, with Rory nodding in agreement. Daisy remained quiet but also held a collection of papers filled with lyrics composed by Shin. All right. You'll record this song, and we'll release your album. It will be a hit, I'll tell you, Shin chuckled as he said. Afterward, Shin allowed them to record their music in the studio while observing the situation. When he saw that they could deliver the song very well, Shin left to attend to other tasks. Meanwhile, as Shin focused on grooming his own team of superstars, a few days later, the morning news on CNN featured something intriguing. Faye Coleman, the female news anchor, smiled at the prompter. This might catch the attention of music and song enthusiasts. A citizen captured footage of a foreign man singing a beautiful song, she said, surprised as she read because she had skipped it on the script paper as trivial. She continued, let's watch the footage. The scene shifted to a dimly lit bar, with the camera focused on the bar's stage where a young Japanese man sat in front of a piano. He began to sing, I walked across an empty land, hitting specific piano notes as he continued, I knew the pathway like the back of my hand. I felt the earth beneath my feet, sat by the river, and it made me complete. The footage then cut to the young man singing with Liam playing the guitar. The scene returned to Faye Coleman, who had an astonished expression. She exclaimed without thinking, wow, that's a fantastic song. She then realized her spontaneous comment and chuckled as she asked, can someone tell me the name of that song? The staff didn't mind Faye's question as they simply shook their heads in response. Faye Coleman sighed in a somewhat helpless manner and commented, no? That's a shame. I really like the song. Afterward, she continued with her report. Meanwhile, the viewers who had watched the footage on the news became increasingly interested in the song. Many people across the United States, especially in California, were curious about the song's title. Comments like, I love the song. Can someone please tell me the name? And we need to know the name. Began to flood various platforms. A day later, some individuals even traveled to the CNN headquarters to inquire in person. Seeing the public's enthusiasm, CNN and other major news networks recognized the significance and continued featuring the footage, making it even more popular. This led numerous journalists and reporters to embark on a quest to research the young man behind the song. CNN managed to conduct an interview with the person who had recorded the young man, but he stated, we don't know that foreigner. We just recorded it out of curiosity. This response left many people disappointed, but their hope was soon rekindled when someone reported to CNN that they had seen the young man who sang the song near the Four Seasons Hotel. CNN quickly made their way to the Four Seasons Hotel, but the manager halted them from disrupting the peace of the guests. Consequently, CNN had no choice but to wait outside. Meanwhile, Shin and Oreo Masayoshi, completely unaware of the commotion outside, were peacefully dining at a table. Oreo Masayoshi leaned in and whispered to Shin, boss, it feels like a lot of people are looking at us. He scanned the surroundings, noticing others who seemed to be quietly enjoying their meals. Shin furrowed his brow and shook his head, glancing around. That's just your imagination. However, just as Shin uttered those words, a 14-year-old girl suddenly approached him, catching his attention. Curious, he inquired, oh, young lady, do you need something? The young girl blushed, her brother seated at a distant table silently cheering for her. Shin exchanged a puzzled look with Oreo Masayoshi as he observed the girl's flushed face. The young girl, fidgeting with her hands and nervously tapping her feet, said shyly, Can you give me an autograph? Shin furrowed his brows upon hearing this request, thinking he might have misheard. He asked, excuse me? I didn't hear that clearly. Can you repeat? The young girl nodded and, with a bit more courage, asked again, please give me an autograph. Shin and Oreo were taken by surprise and exchanged bewildered glances. Shin asked in confusion, an autograph. Upon seeing the young girl's nod, he expressed even more confusion. Why do you need my autograph? I'm just an ordinary person here. His brows furrowed in puzzlement. The young girl shook her head and replied, didn't you know? Shin, still puzzled, asked, know what? That you've become famous. The young girl eagerly continued, you've been featured in various media outlets, and your singing video has gone viral. Shin's eyes widened in astonishment as he said, I was actually recorded singing that song. Oreo looked at Shin in surprise, both from the revelation that Shin had been featured in media outlets and from the fact that Shin could sing. The young girl nodded in response to Shin's question, yes. Many people are also curious about the name of the song you sang. Her younger brother, seeing that his sister was engaging with Shin, also joined the conversation. Shin, deep in thought, rubbed his chin, thinking, I've actually become famous. Unbelievable. But a gleam entered his eyes as he realized, I can use this to my advantage. The young girl's younger brother then piped up, can you give us an autograph? Shin eagerly agreed, saying, of course. He asked for their pen and signed Kishan in Japanese on their shirts. The young girl, after receiving the autograph, asked, can you tell us the name of the song you sang in the video? Her younger brother was equally curious. Shin simply smiled and replied, I can't reveal it just yet, but not only will you learn the song's name, you'll also get to listen to it again on the album that my company is about to release. The young girl and her brother exchanged astonished glances. An album? The younger brother was equally excited, exclaiming, you're preparing to release an album already? Shin just smiled and replied, wait for the Kishan Records album by Liam Faith. The young girl and her brother nodded, assuming that Shin's name was Liam Faith. Afterward, Shin and Oreo left the dining room, and Oreo couldn't contain his amazement. He said, boss, you're already so popular. Shin chuckled in response. As they headed toward the exit, Shin noticed a gathering of people wearing shirts with various media network logos outside the hotel. Oreo pointed this out to Shin, saying, boss, it seems they're here for you. He glanced at Shin and asked, what's your plan, boss? Shin simply smiled and answered, I'll face them. Shin walked out of the hotel, and within moments, a crowd of reporters surrounded him. One of them inquired, hello. You've become a sensation among music lovers recently. Do you have any comments on that? Shin responded with gratitude, saying, I am grateful. A CNN reporter then asked, many people are curious about the song you just sang. Could you reveal its name? Shin maintained his smile as he replied, you'll find out when Kishan Entertainment Records releases the album. The CNN reporter gasped and exclaimed, we suspected it. It's an original song, isn't it? Although many already assumed it was an original song, they eagerly wanted to know the title and hoped to hear the singer perform it again. Shin nodded in confirmation. Another reporter inquired, Kishan Entertainment Records? We haven't heard of it before. Is it your own agency? Shin nodded and replied, it's my company. The reporters were surprised to learn that such a young man had established his own company. A female reporter then asked, so, you're a singer with your own company? Shin shook his head and clarified, no, I have a talented artist who will be singing for my company. The female reporter was taken aback and said, I thought it was your original song. Will you not be singing it? Shin smiled and explained, I'm the song's composer, but I can't bring out its full potential. He paused and added, furthermore, Liam Faith, my talent, will maximize its potential. I promise this to all of you and to the music lovers out there. Many reporters nodded in understanding. Realizing that Shin wasn't a professional singer, one of them asked, can you tell us the release date of the album? Shin smiled and responded, it will be released first at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival on June 20, 1991. The Telluride Bluegrass Festival was known for providing a platform for independent artists who lacked the financial means to promote their music. Chapter 109, Investment on Silicon Valley Companies. Florida, USA. Fort Myers. South Village at Florida Gulf Coast University. In a dorm room in South Village, Florida, a young Japanese man named Shoaki Suzuki couldn't contain his excitement as he gazed at a widescreen TV. "Isn't this Shinro?" Shoaki exclaimed, recognizing the figure on the screen. Shoaki happened to be the cousin of Shinro Suzuki, and his curiosity got the better of him. He took a sip of his juice and mused, "What's he doing here? He even founded a company in this place. Kishan? That name sounds oddly familiar. Manhattan, New York. Four Seasons Hotel." Shin received a phone call from Andrew, the CEO of Target, while staying at the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan. With a hearty laugh, Andrew remarked over the phone, "Well, I didn't expect this to be your way of aligning the stars with those superstars." He paused for effect before continuing, "But I have a feeling it's going to take more than that." Shin smiled confidently and said, "It doesn't matter. As long as my company gains recognition, many people will purchase our products. When they compare our products to Tora and Suzuki, they will still choose the ones that provide the most entertainment. It doesn't matter whether Tora and Suzuki have endorsements from big superstars." Andrew simply chuckled and replied, "Let's see." With a smile, Shin concluded the call. In fact, many of his new partners in the USA, like Celine and others, had reached out to inquire about his situation. At this moment, Shin received a report from Oryo Masayoshi regarding the technology companies in Silicon Valley. Shin still had a month left in the USA before returning to Japan, and he intended to make the most of his time to unearth the hidden treasures that had gone unnoticed by the people of this land or the world. Having already booked a flight to San Francisco, he prepared to travel to the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area, where Silicon Valley is situated. The journey would take approximately 8 hours, so Shin promptly hailed a taxi to head to the airport. After some time, he boarded the airplane and journeyed to San Francisco International Airport. Upon arrival, he hailed a taxi to transport him to Silicon Valley. As he reached his destination, he dialed a number. Saratoga, California. Silicon Valley. The Plumed Horse. The Plumed Horse, an upscale restaurant, had 3 men seated at a table, sipping on water. One of these men was Zeph Olson, a middle-aged individual and the CEO and founder of the fledgling World Wide Web, which was still in its early stages. Another was Nathaniel Walsh, a man in his 30s and the CEO of RealSoft. Nathaniel had been a student at Carnegie Mellon University, where he assembled a team to research the connection of physical objects to the Internet. RealSoft was still in its infancy and had yet to generate any revenue, making them eager to secure investors, though they had been struggling in this endeavor. The third man, Albert Chandler, held the title of CEO at Rebold Technology, a company specializing in global positioning system and mobile phone technologies. With a smile, Albert addressed the other 2 men, saying, "It appears you've been invited by Shinro Suzuki as well." Zeph nodded in agreement, adding, "Yes, our company is in need of investors, and an opportunity to secure substantial funding from such a wealthy individual was too enticing to pass up." Nathaniel chimed in but expressed his concern, "We've been waiting for an hour, though." Albert nodded, revealing, "I wouldn't have waited here if he hadn't provided me with $2,000 as proof." Zeph and Nathaniel both nodded in agreement, with Nathaniel adding, "Yes, that guy also transferred that amount of money into my account." While they were deep in discussion, Zeph's phone rang, and he promptly answered, "Hello." Shin's voice came through on the phone, and he inquired, "Did you see 2 gentlemen at your reserved table?" Zeph nodded and asked, "Are you nearby, Mr. Suzuki?" Shin simply replied, "Please wait for me," and ended the call. Several minutes later, to their surprise, they spotted a young man approaching their table. Uncertain, Zeph cautiously inquired, "Mr. Suzuki?" Shin nodded and took a seat in the unoccupied chair. Nathaniel, still a bit puzzled, asked, "Are you the one who offered to invest in our company?" Shin affirmed with a warm smile. He had arranged this meeting after learning about the technologies they were researching. These companies were all located in the renowned Silicon Valley, which had not yet attained the level of popularity and reputation it held in his past life. Among them was the CEO of World Wide Web, Zeph Olson. World Wide Web was still in its initial stage and was underestimated by people worldwide. The other CEO specialized in IoT, which stands for Internet of Things. This technology plays a vital role. The Internet of Things, IoT, is a network of physical objects embedded with sensors, software, and other technologies, designed to connect and exchange data with other devices and systems via the Internet. These devices range from everyday future household objects to sophisticated future industrial tools, with endless possibilities. As for the CEO of Rebold Technology, the company focused on GPS and mobile phones. While the mobile phone market was already established, it was still in its early stages of development. Why did Shin reach out to these individuals? Was it to secure their technologies and rights? While that may seem like a logical and reasonable assumption, what Shin truly aimed to acquire from these companies was their research capabilities. By consolidating these research companies under the umbrella of Kishan Research, Shin could expedite the advancement of technologies for his handheld and console research projects. Zeph maintained a serious tone, unfazed by Shin's youthful appearance. He inquired, "Mr. Suzuki, I'm intrigued. How do you intend to invest in my company?" The others joined in, their curiosity piqued as they gazed at Shin. Shin smiled as he made his proposal, "Would it be possible for me to acquire 80% of your company's shares?" Nathaniel was taken aback by the request, exclaiming, "That's impossible." Albert also shook his head and remarked, "Mr. Suzuki, that's quite improbable." Zeph echoed their sentiments, stating, "Such a proposal is difficult for us to accept." With a tinge of regret in his voice, Shin acknowledged their responses, "I expected as much from the three of you." Then, the three men fixed their attention on Shin as he continued, "I'm prepared to make substantial investments in your companies, but under these conditions." Shin handed a paper to each of them. They examined the papers, and one of the conditions outlined a partnership in research with Kishan Research, which they found reasonable. Zeph agreed, stating, "I can accept those terms." The other two nodded in agreement. Albert inquired, "Kishan Company? We haven't heard of your company before. Are you certain you can invest a substantial amount in us?" The others also nodded inquisitively. Shin smiled as he clarified, "My company is based in Japan." He noticed the three of them exchanging confused glances and added with a smile, "My company's net worth is around $1 billion USD. Upon hearing this, the three of them looked at Shin in utter shock. Shin maintained his smile, thinking, "That seems about right. My company's revenue is at least 170 billion yen from the significant sales in Asia alone." Zeph, Nathaniel, and Albert gaped at Shin in disbelief, their expressions reflecting their astonishment. 1 billion. Chapter 110, Kishan's album popularity and Kishan's products was finally releasing in USA. San Juan Mountains. Telluride, Colorado. Telluride Bluegrass Festival. June 20, 1991. A sizable crowd had already gathered, approximately 88,000 people attended the festival. A prominent stage hosted various singers and bands. At a distance, Kishan stalls were set up, with a saleswoman offering albums recorded by Kishan's talents. Excitedly, a man wearing nothing but shorts exclaimed, "Hey, that's the album I've been searching for." His friend beside him nodded in agreement, saying, "I've been hunting for that song forever." The saleswoman smiled as a growing number of people gathered around the stall and said, "Hello, if you're in search of that viral yet undiscovered song, you've come to the right place. Meanwhile, backstage, Liam and the other Kishan artists were getting ready to perform the songs from their albums. Liam was the first to take the stage, and as Daisy and the others waited, he began to sing, "I used to rule the world, seas would rise when I gave the word," with a sense of urgency. "Now in the morning, I sleep alone, sweep the streets I used to own." The crowd listened in rapt attention as Liam performed the previously unheard song. After Liam finished his performance, the crowd erupted with demands for an encore, shouting, "Encore! Encore!" Amused by their enthusiasm, Liam, still on the stage, chuckled and spoke into the microphone, "Folks, there are other talented artists waiting to perform. If you want to hear that song again, you can purchase my album at the Kishan stall." With that, he walked off stage, wearing a contented smile. A person in the crowd questioned, "Kishan?" However, most had taken note of Liam's words and a few had already headed towards the Kishan stall, while the majority remained to listen to more songs from the performers on stage. Next up was Daisy, who took the stage and began singing, "Heart Beats Fast, Colors and Promises, How to Be Brave." She continued with a sense of urgency, "How can I love when I'm afraid to fall?" Then, picking up the tempo, she sang, "But watching you stand alone, all of my doubt suddenly goes away somehow." The crowd was pleasantly surprised by yet another song they hadn't heard before, but found it remarkably good. After Daisy's performance, the crowd clamored for more, to which Daisy responded with a smile, "Just look for Kishan Records to find my album." A person in the crowd echoed, "Kishan again?" with growing interest. "That company seems to have a lot of interesting songs. I recall hearing about it during a CNN interview with a man." Following that, Stanley and Rory also performed songs from Shin's previous life, and they announced that their albums would be available through Kishan. Consequently, many people became quite curious about Kishan Entertainment. "That's it. I'll buy Kishan's albums. Count me in too. I'll buy them all." Thanks to artists like Liam and the others, many festival goers visited the several Kishan stalls set up at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival. Numerous media outlets in the USA also featured footage of Kishan's artists performing on the Telluride Bluegrass Festival stage. As a result, many music enthusiasts developed an interest in Kishan Entertainment Records albums. The albums were sold in various stores, including record stores, department stores, and even grocery stores. These distribution networks had been established by Kishan in recent days, except for the relations with major retailers like Target and Kmart. The company Kishan suddenly gained recognition in the USA as an entertainment and record company. Various popular singers also took notice of the songs performed by Kishan's artists. At the mansion, Freddie Mercury was listening to the song Viva la Vida. Tears welled up in his eyes as he sat in silence, a woman gently running her fingers through his hair, her eyes filled with melancholy. Michael Jackson nodded in rhythm to the song "A Thousand Years" by Daisy Willis. "Heart beats fast, colors and promises, who?" he sang, his eyes closed, snapping his fingers. Several top stars, including Whitney and Madonna, also sang along to the song. These accomplished artists, instead of feeling envious of songs gaining popularity, embraced the beauty of the music created by emerging new talents. Meanwhile, as Kishan's albums gained popularity, the company finally introduced its video game console and video games to the USA market. But most of the video game players in the USA were unaware, and in a random household, a young player discussed with their friend, "Tora released a new game? What's it called?" "It's something about a monkey collecting bananas," his friend replied while they played a video game. "I like Ninja Master of Suzuki the most." July 8, 1991. In a random household, a video game player who had grown tired of Japanese companies' games was watching Tom and Jerry on TV. Suddenly, a Kishan advertisement appeared on various TV channels in the USA. "The #1 video game company in Japan is here. the American narrator enthusiastically declared as the scene showcased the white Kishan console. A kid inserted a Super Mario Bros. Cartridge into the console, and the child played with joy alongside their family. "Now, you can play with power," the narrator announced with excitement. "Get it now." Upon seeing this ad, the man who had been lounging immediately turned off the TV and rushed to grab his wallet. While all of this was happening, Liam Faith was featured on MTV, singing, "I used to rule the world, seas would rise when I gave the word." Many music enthusiasts were watching and listening to the music, fully immersed in the atmosphere. After Liam finished singing, the crowd below the stage erupted in cheerful cheers. He was then approached for an interview by a man who said, "Liam Faith, your name and songs have been steadily climbing on the Billboard magazine, and your song Somewhere Only We Know is already in the top 50. Viva La Vida is at a respectable 78. Liam smiled, a hint of tears in his eyes, and replied, "This is all thanks to the music listeners who supported this song and spread the word about my album." The interviewer smiled genuinely and praised, "You completely deserve it. I love all your songs. They seem ahead of their time." Liam nodded and added genuinely, "Thank you. I also want to express my gratitude to Kishan Entertainment." As the crowd cheered, Liam continued, "Without Kishan Entertainment, I probably wouldn't be here and wouldn't be able to sing these wonderful songs." The interviewer acknowledged the contribution of Kishan, recalling that the company was gaining attention, and said, "Speaking of Kishan, that entertainment company seems to be garnering a lot of fans for the songs they've composed. I'm genuinely curious about the person behind these compositions." He remembered Shinro briefly but doubted such a young man could create these songs. Liam just smiled in response and said, "I apologize, but I can't answer that question." Liam saw the interviewer nod, then continued, "But I can tell you that Kishan isn't solely focused on entertainment." The interviewer and the crowd were taken aback as the man asked, "Oh? What does that mean?" With a smile, Liam revealed on live TV, Kishan is actually a video game company. It was incredibly popular throughout Japan, selling consoles and video games that were a massive hit in Asia. Even the two giant companies, Kishan's competitors, couldn't match their success in Asia. The interviewer couldn't interrupt Liam, who spoke so quickly that the director had no chance to intervene. Many people in their households watched and heard this revelation, sparking curiosity about Kishan's console and video games. Gradually, Kishan's video games and console advertisements gained more recognition. Chapter 111, Hype in the United States? On a random Target mall in the USA. Gradually, people in the USA began to learn about Kishan's products, such as KES and the console. In a Target mall, a man said to his friend, "They say that Kishan was able to dominate Japan," he said while holding the Kishan Entertainment System. His friend responded, "I don't know if it's true, man, some companies tend to exaggerate their achievements sometimes." The man nodded and said, "Well, let's see for ourselves if it's worth a try." New York, USA. Tora Corporation Branch HQ. Luther Toole, the president of Tora Corporation USA, examined the KES released by Kishan. This company was still able to make its way into the US market despite our efforts to prevent their entry, a Japanese executive exclaimed as he stroked his chin. Luther chuckled as he remarked, "These retail companies were simply enticed to distribute a product that outperforms ours in Asia, believing they can sell it in the market." In New York, Suzuki Electronics branch headquarters was also located. The president and the executives had a solemn reaction as they reported this to the main headquarters situated in Japan. Suzuki Electronics headquarters. CEO Nico Tabata held a meeting with the executives to discuss the Kishan's release in the USA market. One of the executives said, "I have doubts about their sales in the USA market. Americans prioritize quality, and our console is of higher quality and more powerful than the KES. I doubt they can compete." The other executives concurred, and Nico Tabata nodded, saying, "That's true." Suzuki Group. Vice Chairman Ctto, the younger brother of Chairman Shiro, received news from his son in the States that he had seen Shinro in a major news report in the USA. With this information in mind, Ctto planned to mock his elder brother once more. He had been eyeing the position of chairman held by Shiro. His envy for Shiro dated back to their childhood. Their father's preference for Shiro over him had filled him with extreme jealousy. That's why he was now approaching Shiro's office with the intention of informing him that his beloved younger son had garnered attention from major news in the USA. Ctto didn't exactly know why Shinro was being featured in the USA news, but upon learning of it from his son, he assumed it couldn't be a good thing. This might be his chance to taunt his elder brother. He approached the chairman's office and knocked on the door several times. The chairman's secretary opened the door and was quite surprised to see the vice chairman. Vice Chairman Ctto entered the room with a smug expression and noticed his elder brother writing something on paper while sipping coffee. Elder brother. Ctto seated himself on the sofa and poured a coffee into an empty cup without displaying any etiquette or respect for Shiro. Shiro was already accustomed to this and replied indifferently, "What do you want?" Ctto chuckled and responded, sipping his coffee, "Do you have any news about your youngest son?" Shiro's brow furrowed upon hearing this, and he stopped writing, focusing his attention on Ctto. He asked, "Why do you ask that?" Ctto smiled, sitting back on the sofa, and said, "Don't be shocked by what I'm about to tell you. About your youngest son." He paused, observing his elder brother's face closely. It seems that no matter how cold he is towards his sons, he still has a heart. I like to tease him like this. Ctto thought, wearing a smirk on his face. Shiro frowned, a sense of worry creeping into his heart. "What about my son?" he asked with wide eyes. Although he had inquired about his youngest son's well-being from his wife, he was still curious about how his son was doing now. As for Shiryu, he knew that the boy had been doing quite well. Ctto smirked and said, "Take it easy, elder brother, no need to raise your voice," he said, relaxedly sipping his coffee. Shiro looked at his brother in silence. Seeing that Shiro remained silent, Ctto decided to reveal the information with a hint of mockery, "Don't be too surprised, but I just heard from my son that your youngest son was in the United States." Shiro was visibly taken aback by this revelation and exclaimed, "He was in the States?" Ctto nodded and added, "Not only that, but from what I heard, he was featured in the news." Shiro furrowed his brows upon hearing this and asked, "Why was he featured in the news?" Ctto shook his head and replied, "I'm not sure about that. My son was rather vague about it." Shiro nodded seriously, saying, "I see." Ctto then teased, "Maybe your youngest son got himself involved in a scandal." Shiro frowned at those words and instructed his secretary, "Please escort the vice chairman out." The secretary acknowledged the request, but Ctto chuckled lightly and said, "Hee, there's no need. I can leave by myself." After saying that, he stood up and walked out of the office. Once his brother had left the office, Chairman Shiro directed his secretary, "Please obtain a copy of the news footage where my son was supposedly featured." The secretary nodded and exited the office. Deep in thought, Shiro mused, what is he doing outside the country? How can he afford it? Shiro hadn't inquired much about Shinro from his wife. After a while, his secretary entered the room with the tape. Shiro eagerly inquired, "Is that the recording of the news?" with anticipation in his voice. The secretary nodded, and Shiro promptly instructed him to insert the tape into the VCR and turn on the large television. After a moment, the tape began to play. "Hello. You've recently become a sensation among music lovers. Do you have any comments on that?" the interviewer asked. Shin responded with gratitude, saying, "I am grateful." A CNN reporter then inquired, "Many people are curious about the song you just sang. Could you reveal its name?" Shin maintained his smile as he replied, "You'll find out when Kishan Entertainment Records releases the album." Shiro and his secretary watched the tape recordings of Shinro being interviewed by various media outlets. Upon hearing Shinro mention Kishan, Shiro immediately furrowed his brows. After watching the entire recording, Shiro frowned thoughtfully and commented, "Kishan Entertainment Records." He then chuckled, adding, "I didn't expect that my seemingly foolish son was also working for that company, aside from Shiryu." Robert Johnson had recently taken a trip to Disneyland with his wife and child. Upon returning home, his child eagerly turned on the TV to watch cartoons, but they were in for a surprise. Kishan Entertainment System is now in the States. The narrator enthusiastically proclaimed, while on screen, a teenager played Duck Hunt using a zapper light gun. "Now you can play with power." Robert's child exclaimed with excitement, "Daddy! Isn't that the game you got for me?" while clutching the zapper light gun that Robert had purchased in Japan. Astonished, Robert nodded quickly and said, "They've finally made it to Japan." His child also nodded, adding, "My friend has always been curious about the video games you brought." Robert chuckled and promptly called his friend, urging him to head to the stores before they missed their chance, as the Kishan console was likely to become extremely popular. With the attention of the rapidly growing community of video game enthusiasts in the USA, there was a real possibility that they'd once again have to endure long lines, a situation they preferred to avoid. As expected, video game enthusiasts who were well aware of Kishan's background in Japan rushed to retail stores and malls to buy Kishan's products as quickly as possible. Even small and large gangs with tenuous connections to various international criminal organizations, including the Yakuza, the Triad, and the Epoch, seized the opportunity to purchase Kishan consoles with the intention of later engaging in price gouging. In this fictional world, the Triad is a Chinese crime syndicate, and the Epoch is a South Korean crime syndicate. In this unique setting, these two syndicates, along with the Yakuza syndicate in Japan, have clandestine dealings with each other. It's important to note that these connections exist solely within the context of this fiction and may not reflect reality in the real world. Chapter 112, American Newbie Simp and Kishan's new video game released. Manfred Harris, a wealthy second-generation Californian, cruised in his vibrant red sports car along the road. Numerous onlookers marveled at his vehicle, but Manfred remained indifferent. He pulled over in front of a portly man on the sidewalk, and Manfred exclaimed, "Get in, you imbecile!" The chubby man happened to be his younger brother, Rupert Harris. Rupert retorted, "There's no need to use that tone, you brute." Manfred stared at Rupert with wide eyes and said, "What did you just call me, fatso?" Rupert refused to back down, saying, "An ignorant brute who's always chasing after women." Manfred interrupted, "Shut up, or I'll give you a black eye." Rupert quickly fell silent, glaring at Manfred with anger, and muttered, "You're the one who asked for my help, and you're treating me like this." Manfred fell into a momentary silence before resuming his drive and inquiring, "You mentioned that Lila enjoys playing video games." Rupert nodded apathetically, "Yeah, she used to be into video games." "So, what's the deal?" Manfred furrowed his brow and remarked, "Come on, little bro, didn't we discuss this already?" Rupert snorted, "The way you're talking to me makes me reconsider helping you." Manfred sighed and conceded, "I'm sorry, okay." He gazed at Rupert in silence as he parked the car in front of Target Mall. He then implored, "Please assist me in choosing a great video game to win her heart." Rupert remained silent for a while before he sighed and commented, "You know, big bro, Lila isn't just any girl, she has class. She's all about academics and her passion for video games, especially those produced by Japanese companies." Manfred nodded, listening attentively. Rupert continued, "In addition to video games, she's also a music enthusiast." Manfred took note of this information. Rupert then added, "And when Lila listens to a particular song and loves it, she also becomes interested in." Rupert paused. Manfred, with a puzzled expression, hurriedly asked, interested in what? Rupert remained silent but extended his right hand toward Manfred. Manfred furrowed his brow and questioned, do you need money? When he saw Rupert nod, Manfred inquired, how much? Rupert replied indifferently, 10 grand. Manfred shook his head and said with a frown, that's impossible. Rupert chuckled and remarked, then you'll never find out what Lila wants. Manfred bit his lower lip and grumbled, you're fortunate to be Lila's close friend, or I'd. Manfred stopped speaking when he saw Rupert looking at him, so he retrieved the money from the storage compartment in the center console of his sports car, situated between the driver and passenger seats. Rupert's eyes brightened as he observed the stack of money from Manfred and watched him count it before receiving the bundle of cash. Manfred, his voice tinged with discomfort, stated, that's it. 10 grand. His monthly allowance was now depleted. Rupert smirked after receiving the money and counting it to confirm it was 10 grand. Lila is interested in the new Japanese company that recently entered the USA market. It's called Kishan. Manfred's expression became serious as he muttered, Kishan, hey. He then glanced at his remaining $500. Is this enough to buy their video games? Manfred asked Rupert, who nodded eagerly. Observing this, Manfred swiftly parked his sports car and, with Rupert in tow, entered the Target store. They arrived at the video games section and saw the Tora and Suzuki sections. After some searching, they stumbled upon the Kishan section, where several people were already browsing. People were engaged in conversations like, will this be any good? I'm not sure. The Zapper light gun seems like a Suzuki knockoff somehow. Yeah, and Tora copied Suzuki too. What can you expect? Suzuki is a major company, and even smaller companies take inspiration from them. While people chatted, Manfred looked at Rupert and asked, so? What should I buy? Rupert chuckled and said, you really know nothing about video games, do you? Manfred snorted and remarked, do you even know who I am? I'm a sports player. If my woman, Lila, didn't have an interest in video games, I wouldn't be wasting my time here. As he spoke, many of the players hanging around the store turned their attention toward him. Noticing their curious looks, Manfred questioned, what? This prompted the video game enthusiasts to quickly avert their gazes. In unison, most of them thought, a guy trying to impress a girl with video games, what a simp. Rupert, feeling embarrassed by his elder brother's comment, whispered, let's start by getting the console and then the video games. Manfred nodded, and Rupert guided him to purchase the KES 8-bit system and the video games, including Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, and Duck Hunt, complete with the Zapper light gun. Rupert then concluded, I believe that's everything. Manfred nodded, though he was now left with little money after this shopping spree. He believed it would all be worthwhile once he won Lila's heart and puss, but he caught himself before finishing a potentially inappropriate thoughts. Manfred said, let me try playing this video game to see if it's really good, and if it's not. He then fixed a cold stare on Rupert. I'll expect to get my 10 grand back, understood? Rupert, who observed his elder brother's intense gaze, hastily nodded and reassured Manfred. Deep down, he was actually quite concerned. He hadn't tried Kishan's video games before, and like many Americans, he also considered Kishan to be a knockoff of Tora and Suzuki consoles and video games. Once they returned to the sports car and headed home, they entered the mansion and made their way to the living room. Manfred had no idea how to set up a video game console, so he asked Rupert to handle it. Rupert started the Kishan console and inserted the Super Mario Bros. Cartridge into the slot. Let's find out if it's any good, Manfred grinned at a nervous Rupert. Super Mario Bros. Booted up as Manfred grasped the controller. Rupert silently prayed that Kishan's video games would impress, or else he'd lose his 10 grand. The iconic Super Mario Bros. Music theme played in the background as Manfred assumed control with the controller. As the game began, Manfred guided the dwarf character with curiosity, and it felt incredibly smooth as he unintentionally jumped on an enemy's head, causing it to plummet. Oh! Manfred grew more intrigued as he manipulated his character, making Mario jump, but he inadvertently led his character to its demise. I died. Manfred muttered with a furrowed brow. Meanwhile, Rupert's anxiety increased, but Manfred persisted in playing. This time, his curiosity was piqued by a floating box. He made his character jump and headbutt the box, causing a mushroom to pop out. Manfred deftly steered his character, collecting the mushroom and watching as his dwarf character grew to a larger size. Manfred became completely absorbed in the video game Super Mario Bros., nearly forgetting about Rupert beside him. Rupert grew increasingly relieved as it seemed that Manfred was enjoying the game. Then, he noticed that Manfred's Super Mario Bros. Game ended, and Manfred paused the game, turning to look at Rupert. Rupert's anxiety returned, and he saw Manfred extend his open palm, which made him sigh helplessly, assuming that Manfred wanted his 10 grand. However, as he thought that, Manfred surprised him by saying, "Give me $1,000. Rupert was pleasantly surprised and exclaimed, "You want $1,000? Manfred nodded, gesturing for the money. Rupert quickly retrieved the $1,000 and, before handing it to Manfred, asked, "Why do you want only $1,000? Didn't you dislike the game?" Manfred shook his head and replied, "No, I quite like it, and I think it suits Lila." But... Rupert gazed at Manfred, filled with curiosity. Manfred continued, "Even though I don't know much about video games, I really enjoyed this one, Super Mario Bros." He paused before adding, "So, I plan to buy a new case for Lila." Rupert looked at Manfred in astonishment and asked, "Didn't you already buy her this one?" He gestured toward the console connected to the TV. Manfred shook his head and stated, "No, that one's for me. I'll purchase a new one for her, so you better act quickly before I take the entire 10 grand from you." Manfred delivered the threat with a cold tone. Rupert promptly nodded and handed over the $1,000. Manfred quickly counted the money and hastily left the mansion. Rupert sighed in relief. Meanwhile, much like Manfred, many people in the United States who were previously unfamiliar with video games but had now played Super Mario Bros. Found themselves captivated by the video games released by Kishan. From hundreds of sales on the first day, Kishan's sales soared to thousands of units sold per day. However, it was still a long way from matching the established presence of Tora and Suzuki in the USA market. Tora and Suzuki were growing vigilant of Kishan's console, anticipating a gradual establishment of its presence in the USA market. To their surprise, Kishan suddenly released new video games in the USA market, alongside the Japanese market. These new video games included Contra and one of Shin's previous life's most famous and successful franchises, Street Fighter. These releases promised to create a storm in both the Japanese and US markets. We reached top 1. Thank you, everyone. While I had a faint expectation, it still surprises me. I genuinely appreciate your support. Smiling face with smiling eyes blowing a kiss person with folded hands. Chapter 113, Street Fighter. Tokyo, Japan. Many people in and around Tokyo, as well as in numerous cities, had already swarmed various stores and malls to purchase the video games Contra and Street Fighter. Meanwhile, media outlets were featuring scenes of people in chaos, all just to get their hands on Kishan video games. Once again, propaganda resurfaced, portraying Kishan as a negative influence on Japan's youth, but this narrative primarily resonated with the older generation. As for the younger generation, they enthusiastically bought Kishan video games. Given Kishan's established reputation for quality and popularity in the market, many people in Japan were already expecting these games to be excellent. In a random store, a Tora supporter said to his friend, "A new Kishan video game? I doubt it can compare to the quality of their initial releases." His friend chuckled and responded, "It's Kishan. Kishan's video games are always great." The Tora supporter retorted, "You're just blinded by fanaticism." His friend smiled and said, "Maybe you're right. But its popularity speaks for itself, doesn't it?" The Tora supporter fell silent upon hearing that. USA. In various states across the USA, many people were not yet fully aware of Kishan video games. But there were already a significant number of people who became fans of Kishan after playing Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. In the various stores and malls where Kishan products occupied shelves, what had started with a few people looking for Kishan's products had now grown to dozens of people. In a random Kmart store, popularity was gradually on the rise in the USA. Larry Pina, a middle-aged man who had been a fan of video games since the 1960s, had a particular fondness for Tetris and Pong, along with some simple spaceship shooting games. However, everything came crashing down when the video game industry suffered a 97% loss and seemed irrecoverable. Then, in 1990, a Tora product related to video games was released in the USA, and news of a slow recovery in the video game industry made headlines. Initially, it gained only limited popularity, until Suzuki also introduced their video game console and video games. What truly revitalized the video game industry was when Suzuki secured Michael Jackson as an endorser for their video game console and games. Michael Jackson's endorsement became a sensation, and many people began to take notice of the once dormant video game industry. And then, it became an even bigger sensation when Tora secured contracts with Whitney and Nirvana to endorse their video game console and games. Many of these artists' fans also became interested in the video games. While Tora and Suzuki's video games weren't on par with Kishan's quality in Japan, many people in the USA still found them entertaining. However, this was mainly because Kishan's video games hadn't yet graced the USA market in 1990. For several months, both of these major companies, Tora and Suzuki, led many Americans to believe that they were the saviors of the video game industry. As stated in a Tora advertisement in the USA, the narrator exclaimed, "The savior of an industry is here. Tora VG 16-bit entertainment system." Of course, Suzuki wasn't to be outdone, and they released a similar advertisement, directly contradicting Tora. Many people began to think that these two Japanese giants might be the ones responsible for reigniting people's interest in video games. Larry Pina also held this belief for months until Kishan entered the USA market. Although this Japanese company was considerably smaller compared to the other two, Tora and Suzuki, it gained significant attention as a few emerging music stars endorsed Kishan. Larry Pina's interest was piqued, and he purchased a Kishan video game console and games. When he played Super Mario Bros., he was completely captivated and endorsed it to his children, who now had families of their own. Larry Pina, just after playing Super Mario Bros., felt that the video games he had played for several months, such as those from Tora and Suzuki, had lost their appeal in his eyes. He couldn't believe he had been able to endure playing video games from those two major companies with such limited gameplay, and he remembered enjoying them at the time. However, after playing Super Mario Bros., it felt like he had struck gold. Now, he was at the Kmart store to purchase the new video games advertised by Kishan, Contra and Street Fighter. After making the purchase, he returned home to fetch his KES, Kishan Entertainment System, and then headed to his first son's house. He rang the doorbell, and his portly son, Rodi Pina, opened the door, exclaiming, "Dad? What brings you here?" Larry chuckled and asked, "Did you buy a KES like I suggested?" His first son, Rodi, nodded and said, "I didn't, but I have an SES and Tora." Larry furrowed his brow upon hearing that and replied, "Didn't I tell you? The KES is the real deal. The best option." Rodi smiled wryly and retorted, "Oh, really? But it still uses an 8-bit system. How can it compare to the SES or even Tora? Besides, it's quite expensive." $130 for lower specs doesn't seem like a good idea. Larry just smiled at Rhodey's words as he entered the living room. Rhodey noticed that his father was holding a box and casually asked, "Dad, what are you holding?" Larry didn't reply immediately. As they proceeded to the living room, Larry observed his grandchildren engrossed in playing on the SES, Suzuki Entertainment System. His two grandchildren immediately spotted Larry and joyfully exclaimed, "Grandpa!" Larry warmly smiled and hugged his grandchildren. "Roy and Roni," he greeted. The younger of the two, Roy, asked with excitement, "What did you bring, Grandpa?" Roni mirrored the enthusiasm as they saw their grandpa holding a box. Larry beamed and answered, "This? Oh, this will be a gift from Grandpa to you too." "A gift?" both grandchildren exclaimed in delight. Meanwhile, Rhodey couldn't help but smile at the heartwarming scene. Larry nodded and carefully extracted the case and several Kishan video games from the box. Rhodey and his two sons looked on with curiosity, realizing that it was indeed the case and Kishan video games from the advertisements. Roy voiced his disappointment, saying, "Is that the gift, Grandpa?" Roni shared in the disappointment. Larry noticed the crestfallen expressions of his two grandchildren and asked, "Don't you like it?" Roy and Roni nodded in agreement, with Roy adding, "We already have the SES and Tora 16-bit. I don't think we need another one." Rhodey observed his children's reaction and chuckled, remarking, "It seems they're not very enthusiastic, Dad." Larry simply smiled and assured them, "Ho ho, trust me, after you've played Kishan's video games, you'll forget about SES or Tora." Despite his son and grandchildren's expressions, he proceeded to disconnect the SES from the TV and connect the case. Roni spoke up with watery eyes, "We were in the middle of playing Samurai Lord, Grandpa." Larry quickly comforted his two grandchildren, saying, "Oh, don't cry. If you're not satisfied with the video games Grandpa has brought, Grandpa will take you to Disneyland. How does that sound?" His two grandchildren were instantly swayed and nodded eagerly, their sadness evaporating in an instant. Rhodey observed the situation and chuckled, "You really know how to handle them, Dad." He paused, then continued, "But be prepared to spend your money if they don't like it." Larry smiled and reassured, "Don't worry, they'll like it." After saying that, he inserted Super Mario Bros. Into the console and handed the controller to Roy, while Roni watched with curiosity. After a while, Roy became engrossed in the video game, and Roni eagerly wanted to play. When Roy eventually encountered a game over, it was Roni's turn. Rhodey, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but admit his own interest in playing Super Mario Bros. However, after just half an hour of playing, the two siblings, Roy and Roni, began to argue over who should have the controller. "You already had your turn. Give me the controller," they insisted. Rhodey, seeing the disagreement, intervened, saying, "Roy, it's Roni's turn now. Please give him the controller." Roy shook his head and held onto the controller. Rhodey felt somewhat helpless but had to admit that his father was right. His two sons really enjoyed the Kishan video games. Rhodey turned to his father and asked, "How will you handle this, Dad?" Larry smiled wryly as he replied, "Roy, Roni, no need to argue anymore. I brought a game that both of you can play at the same time." Roy and Roni gazed at Larry with anticipation, and Roy inquired, "Really? Is it as good as Super Mario?" Larry simply nodded, even though he couldn't be sure, having just purchased Street Fighter. However, he had faith in Kishan, as all the Kishan video games he had played so far had been excellent in his opinion. Here, Larry retrieved the Street Fighter cartridge and inserted it into the console. Instantly, the scene on the television transformed. It displayed 2D pixelated walls, with Kishan painted on the walls and some small hidden text Easter eggs in the corner. The wall cracked as a green-haired man behind it delivered a powerful punch. The man's back bore the title and logo of Street Fighter, and the title transitioned onto the screen, accompanied by the Street Fighter logo on a black background. Everyone watched the television screen with curiosity as the text appeared, "Press start." Larry observed this and said, "Press start, Roy." Roy nodded, pressed start, and then pressed the button to begin. On the screen, 4 flags appeared for him to choose from with the text above, "Course select." The flags represented Japan, USA, Britain, and China. Roy swiftly selected the USA flag without hesitation, and the narrator announced, "USA." Everyone was intrigued, and Roy was given the option to choose between 1 player and 2 players. Larry quickly advised, "Roy, choose 2 players." He inserted another controller and handed it to Roni. Roy selected 2 players, and the screen displayed round 1 as the lively music played. On the screen, 4 faces appeared with VS in between them. "It's 2v2. Larry exclaimed in surprise. The first player, controlled by Roy, was Ryu, and the second player, allied with Ryu and controlled by Roni, was Ken. The game commenced, with Roy and Roni working together to defeat the enemies. The gameplay was captivating, and Roy and Roni were thoroughly enjoying themselves. As the game progressed, Larry and Rodi exchanged glances and, without even realizing it, they too felt the urge to join in and play the game. Chapter 114, Gaining the Attention of Many and Shonen Jump New Issue. USA. Kishan's sales went from 1,000 to several thousand, gradually approaching the daily sales figures of 20,000 to 30,000 for Tora and Suzuki. Word of Street Fighter and Contra making waves in the United States video game community spread rapidly. Furthermore, several people came to realize that Tora and Suzuki were the ones who initially imitated in Japan. Tora US branch headquarters. Luther, the president of Tora US, was discussing their strategy for dealing with Kishan. One of the executives, wearing a concerned expression, commented, "I can't believe it. Despite having only an 8-bit system, they're still able to sell." Luther nodded gravely and stated, "That's why we must remain vigilant and enhance our competitiveness." He paused and continued, "Kishan just released new video games named Contra and Street Fighter. However, Street Fighter garnered the most attention." After saying this, he directed his gaze towards their in-house game developers. These game developers belonged to Tora's separate game development department in the US. They had no direct contact with Tora JP's game developers because the developers at the main headquarters were actually affiliated with the Yakuza, and even the Tora JP president couldn't manage them. This led the Tora Corporation to establish an independent game development department in the US free from Yakuza influence. Luther then turned his attention to the middle-aged creative director leading the game developers, Terry Carter. Luther pondered, "What are your thoughts? Can you take on Kishan's new games, especially Street Fighter?" Terry Carter exchanged glances with his colleagues and expressed hesitantly, "Honestly, after playing the game, both myself and my colleagues felt inadequate. We absolutely admired the gameplay, but at the same time, we detested it." He paused before adding, "It's because it's so good, and we're struggling to come up with something to compete against it in a short time frame." President Luther and the other executives nodded, and President Luther suggested with a smile, "You don't need to reinvent the wheel to compete with it." He paused for a moment and continued, "You can replicate the gameplay with different characters." President Luther and the other executives smiled, and one of them chimed in, "Indeed. Just emulate the game. It's that straightforward." Upon hearing this, the game developers and creative director Terry felt their pride as game developers stung. After all, Terry Carter had previously worked as a game developer at Atari and possessed experience in game development. However, following Atari's bankruptcy, Terry lost his job and settled for a programmer role at Microsoft. Then, Tora surprised the US by introducing video game products. Terry was pleasantly surprised as video games were gradually making a comeback in the US. Because of this, Terry left his cherished job and applied to work for Tora as a game developer once again. Initially, things were going well, but as time passed and Suzuki entered the US market, the competition intensified. Tora's game developers were pitted against Suzuki's in a race to create superior video games. Terry Carter was fired up competing with Suzuki until Kishan entered the US market. As Terry and his colleagues tried playing Kishan's video games, they gradually grew disheartened as they realized what true video games were like. From Super Mario Bros. To The Legend of Zelda, and even Metroid, all of them were masterpieces despite Kishan's weaker specs compared to Tora. They finally grasped how inferior and laughable their own games and competition with Suzuki were. The blow to Tora's game developers was substantial. Kishan released 2 new video games, and when they played Street Fighter, they felt overwhelmed. Can we really compete with such an incredible company? Terry and his colleagues wondered simultaneously. Now tasked with emulating Kishan's Street Fighter, Terry and his colleagues felt underestimated. That's why, a slightly younger game developer than Terry dissented, "I'm sorry, but President. We want to develop our own video game with unique gameplay." Another game developer also objected, "We will create our own original game that can rival Kishan's video games." Terry also addressed the astonished President Luther and the executives, "You're right. We may not be able to come up with a game that can compete with Kishan's Street Fighter, especially not in a short time, but that doesn't mean we should resort to copying. We'll brainstorm and strive to create ideas to compete to potentially surpass Kishan's Street Fighter." He spoke passionately, and his colleagues were equally fired up. President Luther and the executives exchanged surprised and concerned glances. President Luther fixed a serious gaze on Terry Carter and the game developers beside him and asked solemnly, "Are you all absolutely sure about this?" Creative director Terry and his colleagues nodded with unwavering determination. Some of the other executives sighed helplessly, thinking, "These guys. They're incredibly prideful." President Luther turned his attention to the game developers and spoke solemnly, saying, "Very well. Just ensure that you can stand by your words." Creative director Terry nodded resolutely and replied, "We will, President." President Luther nodded, though uncertainty about the future clouded his thoughts. Suzuki Trademark Entertainment. Suzuki Trademark Entertainment was a video game development subsidiary of the Suzuki Group. Seiki Suzuki had just received a report from the CEO of Suzuki's US branch, indicating that Kishan was gradually establishing a presence in the US market. Seiki's expression darkened slightly. For him, Kishan's status as the king in the Japanese or Asian markets was of no concern. Suzuki could follow closely and secure the second position. However, Kishan's attempt to assert its dominance in the US market was something he found unacceptable. Kishan had always excelled at creating video games, which is why they covertly dispatched individuals to entice Kishan game developers to join their company. Seiki's phone emitted a beep, prompting him to answer it. "Boss, we've successfully secured 3 programmers from Kishan." A deep voice sounded on the other end of the phone. Upon hearing this news, Seiki couldn't contain his excitement. He exclaimed, "Really?" The man on the other end of the phone replied, "Yes, we've finally managed to recruit game developers from Kishan." Seiki smiled and responded, "That's great." The man then added, "However, these 3 programmers didn't hold high positions at Kishan, and the reason they agreed to join was because they were let go from Kishan several weeks ago." Seiki furrowed his brow and asked, "They were let go a few weeks ago?" The man confirmed, "Yes, and they also weren't privy to deep information about Kishan's game plans and strategies since they didn't hold significant roles." Seiki frowned but sighed, saying, "That's all right. They're still from Kishan, regardless of their positions." He said this, but deep inside, he couldn't help feeling somewhat disappointed. In the meantime, as Kishan's games and their newly released video games began making waves in the US market, and had already ignited a frenzy in Japan and several Asian countries, a new manga co-authored and sponsored by Kishan's young founder made its debut in Shonen Jump. Kishan promoted it extensively on television. The new manga was titled Dragon Ball, and while many people, particularly video game players, showed little interest, there were still numerous young manga enthusiasts who eagerly purchased the latest issue of Shonen Jump. Chapter 115, Dragon Ball. Tokyo, Japan. At a random high school. A group of high school students were having a discussion. Dragon Ball was promoted by Kishan. I wonder if it's any good. Yeah, it's quite interesting that Kishan has also ventured into the manga industry. Haha, they've even entered the anime industry, and now I'm completely addicted to watching Pokemon. Yeah, as for me, I'm recording it on VCR and then watching all the episodes later. You could buy a tape from Kishan if that's the case, it would be less troublesome than manually recording it all. That's true. Then, a certain young man said, I'm kind of interested in Dragon Ball. Let's buy it. Sure. If it's related to Kishan, it must be good. Eiichiro Oda just purchased Dragon Ball to support his idol. Let's read. I might get inspired by this. Eiichiro smiled as he opened the Shonen Jump weekly magazine and turned to the Dragon Ball issue. Eiichiro stroked his chin as he read. On the first page was the title Dragon Ball with an image of a dragon on the side. On the drawing was a young boy riding a futuristic motorcycle with a young girl. On the futuristic motorcycle's glass was written AF 4029. Eiichiro turned to the next page, where the panel featured an ancient-looking small house. In the drawing, a boy with peculiar hair was striking a martial arts pose. Naya! The boy readied himself, clenching his fists. In the following panel, he exclaimed, "Prepare to die!" as he stood in front of a grove of trees. In the subsequent panel, the boy grasped a piece of wood, and in the next, he hurled it into the sky, shouting, "Hi-ya!" In the next panel, the wood was suspended mid-air, and the boy was depicted chasing after it while declaring, "No escape." Eiichiro turned the page, revealing the boy kicking the large circular piece of wood into fragments. The following panel showed the wooden pieces falling and neatly arranging themselves on the ground. As the kid's back was displayed, it became evident that he had a tail. Eiichiro noticed this on the second page, a clear drawing of the boy's back featuring a tail. Eiichiro mumbled, "It's somewhat reminiscent of Monkey Boy. Will there be new differences this time?" He looked pensive. On the next panel, the boy picked up the wood and said, "That takes care of the wood chopping." In the subsequent panel, still holding the wood and walking, the boy remarked, "Only now, I am hungry." Eiichiro turned the page, and in the next panel, the boy entered his home while seemingly tying something. The kid stood in front of a sphere adorned with stars, hands clasped in a prayer-like gesture, and said, "Hey, Grandpa! I'm gonna grab a bite." In the next panel, the kid pondered while strolling outside, what would be good today? In the subsequent panel, a bird chirped in a tree, and beside it, a young girl stood by a car with her left hand raised in a salute, seemingly gazing into the distance. Eiichiro Oda read the manga Dragon Ball quietly, turning page after page. Essentially, the girl held a circular object, possibly a radar with dots on it. As Eiichiro continued to read, he found the kid removing his clothes and using his tail as bait in the river. He successfully hooked a large fish, showcasing his remarkable strength by lifting it to the surface. This brought a smile of amusement to Eiichiro's face. Continuing on, the young girl, who had been seen earlier, almost collided with the kid in her car, but the kid managed to evade the vehicle. The young girl was surprised, while the kid, believing the car to be a monster, retaliated by lifting it, leaving the young girl in a state of panic, exclaiming, "What? What?" The kid then hurled the car into the distance and celebrated his feat. The young girl was shocked and injured, glaring at the kid. She retrieved a gun and attempted to shoot him, but the bullet merely grazed his skull, causing only minor harm. This left the young girl dumbfounded, questioning why the kid remained unharmed. That could be dangerous, Eiichiro chuckled, thinking, is it really suitable for children? Eiichiro continued reading, discovering that the kid had no concept of the difference between a man and a woman and didn't realize that the young girl, named Bulma, was a human girl. After they got to know each other and resolved their misunderstandings, the kid, Gaku, invited Bulma to his modest home. The young girl was taken aback when she saw the ball she had been searching for. Bulma proceeded to explain the ball's purpose to Gaku, clarifying that it wasn't related to his grandfather but was, in fact, a wish-granting orb known as a Dragon Ball. This, she explained, was also the title of the manga. Bulma described that when all 7 Dragon Balls were gathered and a dragon was summoned, one could make any wish they desired. Bulma attempted to persuade Gaku to let her have the Dragon Ball, but he remained adamant in his refusal. She went to great lengths to convince Gaku to part with the 4-star Dragon Ball, even going as far as showing her current underwear. Gaku simply responded, "Why would I want to see your dirty butt?" His remark left Bulma fuming with anger. This elicited a faint laugh from Iyakiro, who then exclaimed, "I like this character. Maybe I should make the protagonist of my manga equally foolish." Iyakiro nodded in agreement. After all, if the character wasn't as entertaining as Gaku, his manga might struggle to gain popularity. Moreover, he had the freedom to make his protagonist as dim-witted as he pleased, given the storyline and concept paper Shinro had provided. Iyakiro had been pondering this for a while, and as he delved into the pages of Dragon Ball, he decided to revise the writing of his own manga. He hadn't started drawing it yet, as Iyakiro was still in the process of organizing research and crafting the overarching plot outline for his manga. However, he had already created various character designs that could change at any time. With these thoughts in mind, Iyakiro continued reading. The manga concluded with Gaku agreeing to lend Bulma his grandfather, the 4-star Dragon Ball, and accompanying the girl with the futuristic motorcycle initially stored in a small capsule. As they journeyed, they unexpectedly encountered a talking dragon that snatched Bulma and took off into the sky. Gaku rushed to rescue Bulma, using his stick or power pole that could extend in length. He struck the dragon's head, causing it to lose its grip on Bulma. She plummeted rapidly, shouting at the top of her lungs. In midair, Gaku shortened his magical stick and hurled it in Bulma's direction. The next panel depicted Bulma hanging on to Goku's power pole, clinging to a cliff's edge, panic-stricken. Kid Gaku sat on a tall tree, smiling as he observed the dangling Bulma, who was still in distress. This manga. Chapter 1 alone inspires me. Iyakiro smiled and thought, as expected of Kira Toriyama. Meanwhile, many young readers who had delved into the manga Dragon Ball were already captivated by the series after just the first chapter. They found themselves drawn to the manga's unique style and artistic portrayal. It was not only humorous but also engaging. In particular, they were intrigued by the concept of Dragon Balls, or wishing balls. With just the first chapter, their curiosity was piqued, and they couldn't resist the urge to find out what would happen next. Only now I realize I made a mistake in chapter 99, the wedding chapter. I noticed that Shiryu kept referring to his 4th brother as his 4th son. Well, I'm only human, and I make mistakes. I hope you can forgive me, as I couldn't help but laugh when I realized my error. I really didn't intend to do it. Maybe I should add comedy to the tags in this novel. Face with tears of joy, flushed face, person with folded hands. Chapter 116, Owning a Pets. Tokyo, Japan. Roppongi, Minato. While manga fans eagerly anticipated the next developments in Dragon Ball, Shin had recently returned to Japan and was now accompanied by Myra. Their purpose for being in Kojima Roppongi's shop was to purchase a pet. Why, you ask? Myra had developed a fondness for Pokemon anime and desired to own a pet. However, even without the influence of Pokemon, she had always harbored a desire to have a pet. Being already married, she had even contemplated starting a family sooner. But as she was still in university, she had suppressed the idea. Shin, on the other hand, didn't see a problem with the idea of her getting pregnant while still pursuing her education. Kojima Roppongi shop. Shin and Myra entered the store, which was stocked with shelves of pet food and various animal-related items. As they conversed, they approached a sales associate to inquire about purchasing a pet. "Do you wish to become pet owners?" the female sales associate inquired. Shin nodded and replied, "Yes, my wife has a sudden urge to have one." He grinned as Myra playfully pinched him. The female associate smiled and escorted them to the pet section. There, cats, dogs, and various other animals were displayed behind glass and barred cages. A striking woman was nearby, tending to a snake. The female sales associate introduced them, saying, "Yuta-san, this couple is interested in owning a pet." The attractive woman was Eira Yuta. She turned her attention to the sales associate, then glanced at Shin and Myra, nodding briefly before returning to her task of feeding the snake. The sales associate smiled and turned to Shin and Myra, explaining, "That's Eira Yuta, our pet groomer. You can ask her anything about pets, and she'll be happy to assist you." Shin and Myra acknowledged this with a nod, and the sales associate walked away. Approaching the pet groomer, Shin initiated the conversation by asking, "Hello, my wife is interested in getting a pet. Could you recommend something for us?" Eira looked at Shin and then at Myra, maintaining a composed expression as she inquired, "What do you both prefer? Wild animals, reptiles, birds, cats, or dogs?" She posed the question directly. Shin and Myra were taken aback for a moment, exchanging a quick glance before Myra began, "To be honest, we came here with the idea of owning a pet after watching Pokémon, and also..." Myra couldn't complete her sentence as Eira regarded her with a furrowed brow, interjecting, "So, you wanted to get a pet just because of a cartoon?" Myra, hearing this, felt a touch embarrassed as she turned to Shin. Shin offered a wry smile and explained to the woman pet groomer, "That's certainly one of the reasons. However, we had already been contemplating pet ownership before Pokémon even came into the picture." Eira nodded in understanding and said, "Many kids come to our shop wanting pets because of that cartoon. I'd be relieved if you weren't those kinds of people." She paused and continued, "I've witnessed people abandoning their dogs and cats due to various reasons, often because they didn't think things through before getting one. I'm just concerned that you might fall into that category." Shin and Myra shared a reassuring look, and Myra turned to Eira, nodding as she responded, "Don't worry, we're not that kind of people. We've put a lot of thought into this for weeks before deciding to get a pet, and we've been studying how to take care of one as well." Eira's originally stoic expression transformed into a grateful smile upon hearing their reassurances. "That's good to hear," she said, pausing before continuing, "Anyway, let's go back to my previous question. What's your preference?" Myra nodded and replied, "Our interest in owning a pet goes beyond just liking Pokémon. After discussing it, my husband and I both lean towards dogs or cats." Shin chuckled upon hearing Myra's words. In reality, he had a preference for owning a lion or a tiger, but Myra had firmly rejected that idea, opting for a more practical choice of dogs or cats, or perhaps both. Eira smiled and nodded, saying, "I understand." She then led Shin and Myra to the dogs and cats section, remarking with a smile, "To be honest, I enjoy watching Pokémon during my free time, and I can see why it might spark people's interest in owning a pet." Myra agreed, glancing at Shin. "Pokémon was such a great anime, and I think it will only make more people interested in pet ownership." Shin chuckled and remarked, "Pets? No, they'll probably see them as Pokémon, not just pets." Myra and Eira shared a laugh at Shin's comment. Following this, Shin and Myra were introduced to various domestic dog and cat breeds. Myra developed a particular fondness for the golden retriever and the Norwegian forest cat. Eventually, Shin and Myra made their choice, and as they decided, Shin pointed at the golden retriever and playfully said, "I choose you." However, he received a playful pinch from Myra in response. "Woof. The golden retriever responded with a gentle woof and a tilted head, seeming rather perplexed. Aira smiled as she gently stroked the golden retriever's smooth fur, commenting, "Hee hee, it seems this gentleman sees you as a Pokémon." After a while, Aira assisted Shin in processing the paperwork, and Shin and Myra officially became the owners of a dog and a cat. The cat had already taken to perching on Myra's shoulder, while the golden retriever was quite affectionate, cuddling with both Shin and Myra. Shin offered a wry smile as he quipped to Myra, "How do you suppose we'll manage wrestling matches in bed with these little companions?" Myra blushed and playfully pinched Shin, shooting him a stern look since they were still inside the shop. She retorted, "We can always wait until they're asleep." Shin chuckled and replied, "Do you really think they'll sleep? I have my doubts they'll even let us sleep, let alone wrestle." Myra smiled mischievously and whispered, "Well, we can use the bathroom too." Suzuki Mansion. The family gathered around the dining table for their usual meal. Shiro had just heard from his wife that his eldest daughter was dating a delinquent. He cut straight to the point, saying, "You need to break up with your boyfriend." Reina pouted and questioned, "Why, Dad?" Shiro furrowed his brows and delivered an ultimatum, "You won't receive any money or allowance from me if you don't." Reina continued to pout, retorting, "That's not fair." Shiko and Seiki couldn't help but chuckle as they witnessed their father finally reprimanding Reina. It had been a while. Shiro then shifted his attention away from Reina and addressed Shiko and Seiki, saying, "Your grandfather's birthday is approaching, so the two of you should prepare a thoughtful gift." Shiko and Seiki nodded in agreement. Then, Shiro surprised the family with another announcement, "Also, invite Shinro and Shiryu. The old man probably wants to see them." He glanced at his wife, Eri. Eri was somewhat taken aback but nodded in agreement. In the meantime, Shiko and Seiki frowned but chose to remain silent. Sazuma Suzuki, Shiro's father, was the founder of the Suzuki Group. When it came to Sazuma's birthday, the entire Suzuki family, whether they were abroad or in the country, would gather at his house to celebrate the founder's special day. Chapter 117, Tora and Suzuki's Suspicion. Ctto Ward, Tokyo, Japan. Here, in Ctto Ward, Tokyo, Japan, lies the traditional Japanese mansion of Sazuma Suzuki. Within the serene confines of this traditional Japanese mansion's garden, a bamboo grove stands tall. In the training area, an elderly man dons a kakaji, the traditional Japanese martial arts attire. With grace and precision, he wields his gleaming katana through the air, performing a series of deliberate movements. After sheathing his katana, the elderly man positions himself before the bamboo grove. With unwavering focus, he unsheaths his katana and slices it through the bamboo, cleanly splitting it in two. He then carefully wipes the katana blade before returning it to its scabbard. Inside the room, an elderly woman wearing a hakama observes the scene through the open sliding door. Afterward, the elderly man steps into the room where the woman in the hakama resides and sits in quiet contemplation. The elderly woman is Kumiko Suzuki. Kumiko gazes at her husband, who enjoys a cup of tea at the chabude, a Japanese traditional low-stung table. A warm smile graces her face as she inquires, "Husband, your birthday is approaching. What would you like for the celebration this year?" Sazuma remains silent, sipping his tea thoughtfully, and then, with determined eyes, he responds, "Men shall don kimonos, women shall wear hakamas, and my grandsons should be attired in kakaji, for I wish to witness them partake in katana drills." Kumiko smiles affectionately, saying, "You always yearn for such occasions." Sazuma responded to her words, "No, this time I'd like them to compete and determine who excels at a particular skill." Kumiko displayed a hint of surprise and asked, "You're planning to initiate a competition this time?" Sazuma nodded and declared, "I'd like to see who can achieve the highest score in Super Mario." Kumiko couldn't help but chuckle, saying, "I thought it was something more serious, but it's all about your new hobby." She couldn't forget how engrossed her husband had become in Super Mario. Sazuma simply nodded and added, "The one who achieves the highest score will receive a reward of 10 million yen from me." Kumiko burst into laughter at her husband's playful extravagance. Meanwhile, in Shin's office, he received a call from his mother who informed him that his grandpa's birthday was fast approaching. It was set for July 30, 1991. Although Shin hesitated a bit, he ultimately agreed. However, he couldn't help but wonder why his father had chosen to invite him this time, considering he had missed his grandpa's birthday celebration the previous year without an invitation. Shin welcomed Yakuza into his office, and they began discussing their future business plans. With a smile, Shin inquired, "Mr. Yamamoto, given that your company specializes in trading cards, have you already drafted a plan regarding Pokémon cards?" Yakuza eagerly nodded, saying, "I do. Pokémon's popularity has soared recently. In fact, Nippon TV has even ventured to create their own anime with a concept similar to Pokémon." Shin smiled upon hearing this and remarked, "Well, it's not surprising. Asahi TV's soaring ratings have surely sparked some envy in others." As the popularity of Pokémon continued to surge in Japan and across Asia, Nippon TV and other television networks found themselves threatened by Pokémon's immense success. Initially, they may have underestimated Pokémon's potential and expected it to be a flop. However, they were now alarmed by their own dwindling ratings and the sudden ascent of Asahi TV, which had once been a fledgling network. Nippon TV's envy of Pokémon's ratings led them to create an anime with a similar concept, but it turned out to be a financial failure as the ratings didn't meet the network's expectations. Akimitsuo Ishizawa, the CEO of Nippon TV, was in contemplation when his male secretary entered his office with news, saying, "Boss, Tora Entertainment has expressed interest in a collaboration." Akimitsuo Ishizawa was slightly taken aback and responded, "Really?" Upon seeing his secretary nod, Akimitsuo Ishizawa perceived this as an opportunity to compete with Kishin's Pokémon. "Very well, I'll arrange a meeting to discuss the collaboration," Akimitsuo Ishizawa said thoughtfully as he rose from his seat. Tora Corporation Conference Room. President Taro Ikeda remarked, "Pokémon has remained remarkably popular. I never expected the anime to maintain its popularity long after its initial release." One of the executives nodded in agreement and added, "Collaborating with Japan's #1 channel network to brainstorm ideas for a competing anime seems like a solid strategy." President Taro Ikeda nodded in agreement, recalling the words of Tora's chairman. Observing that some of the executives might not fully comprehend the significance, he stated gravely, "The reason I'm so keen to compete with the Pokémon anime is because of something the chairman told me." The other executives exchanged curious glances, with one asking, "What did the chairman say to you?" President Taro Ikeda nodded and explained, "The chairman mentioned to me that Kishin's Pokémon anime might make its way into the world of video games." Upon hearing this, the executives were taken aback, with one of them exclaiming in surprise, "This is..." and another expressing concern, "That's quite alarming." It wouldn't be surprising at all, given the anime's immense popularity in Japan, for it to become one of Kishin's best-selling video games, one executive concluded. President Taro Ikeda solemnly commented, "They've done it before with The Legend of Zelda anime, so it's quite reasonable to expect that they'll adapt it into a video game." However, one of the executives expressed doubt, saying, "But we haven't received any confirmation from Kishin about their intentions to adapt it into video games." Another executive responded confidently, "No, I'm about 99% certain that Kishin will indeed adapt Pokémon into video games." One of them chimed in, "That's true. Kishin is, after all, primarily a video game-focused company, unlike us, who aren't as focused on video games." Another executive added, "Nevertheless, we can't deny the substantial profits that video games have been generating for us so far." President Taro Ikeda nodded and explained, That's precisely why we've partnered with multiple animation studios to create an anime following a concept similar to Pokemon. This way, we can eventually adapt our own anime into video games. Meanwhile, just like Tora Corporation, Suzuki Electronics was also planning a similar venture. Suzuki had decided to collaborate with the TBS and NHK TV broadcasting channels for this endeavor. They also suspected that Kishan was actively preparing to eventually adapt the immensely popular Pokemon anime into video games. Their preparations were so extensive that the Suzuki Group decided to dispatch some of their highly skilled individuals, including programmers, to infiltrate Kishan and gain access to its confidential information. However, as of now, they had not succeeded in breaching Kishan's defenses. Kishan had remained a private company, making it difficult for Tora and Suzuki to obtain any reliable information about its operations. The relatively small Kishan company had proven to be exceptionally adept at safeguarding its sensitive data, which led both Tora and Suzuki to believe that surreptitiously inserting their own talented personnel into Kishan was a sound strategy. For them, if they couldn't surpass Kishan through fair competition, they were willing to resort to espionage. In reality, it wasn't just Kishan that was under scrutiny, both Tora and Suzuki had been engaging in mutual espionage against each other. Chapter 118, Nippon TV Press Conference and Gift Preparation. Tokyo, Japan. July 15, 1991. Tora and Nippon TV Collaboration Press Conference. Various media outlets were present as they interviewed President Taro Ikeda and Akimitsu Ishizawa. We've heard that the collaboration between Tora and Nippon TV is in preparation for an anime that can rival Kishan and TV Asahi's Pokemon, questioned an NHK reporter. President Taro Ikeda anticipated this question and nodded as he responded, "It's quite evident." He paused and glanced at the questioning reporter. "Indeed, we are preparing an anime to compete with Pokemon, given their current popularity." A TBS reporter inquired, "Have Tora and Nippon TV already conceived an anime capable of challenging the immensely popular Pokemon world, especially among the youth?" Upon hearing this, President Taro Ikeda and CEO Akimitsu Ishizawa exchanged glances, both feeling uncertain about whether their anime could truly rival Pokemon. Nippon TV had previously suffered financial losses while attempting to produce a Pokemon-like anime, and not only did they experience financial setbacks, but they also faced criticism, primarily from young audiences, who labeled them as mere copycats. This had negatively impacted Nippon TV's reputation. President Taro Ikeda looked at the TBS reporter and stated, "It's not entirely within my control whether our anime can compete with Pokemon, but we will give our utmost to counter the Pokemon franchise." An NHK female reporter pressed further, "Is it true that Tora and Nippon TV have been preparing to emulate the Pokemon concept in an attempt to provide an alternative to Pokemon and capture the attention of existing Pokemon fans?" President Taro Ikeda chose to deflect that question and instead addressed queries from other reporters. Sitting alongside CEO Akimitsu Ishizawa and the other executives, they faced the group of reporters with their hands resting on the long table and sensed that TBS and NHK reporters were singling them out. Every question posed to them was contentious and seemed designed to cast a shadow over Tora and Nippon TV. While it wasn't unusual for reporters to ask probing questions, the constant barrage of contentious queries from both TBS and NHK reporters left Tora and Nippon TV feeling uneasy. Suzuki Trademark Entertainment. Seiki couldn't help but smile as he observed the awkward positions of President Taro Ikeda and Nippon TV's CEO, Akimitsu Ishizawa, along with their executives on television. Shiko, seated on the sofa, also couldn't contain his amusement at the comical expressions of the Tora and Nippon TV team. He laughed, "Hee, Seiki, you've played quite a cunning trick. It's a rather ruthless one, I must say." Seiki maintained his smile and replied, "There's nothing wrong with almost figuratively taking down our adversaries while they're still in their infancy, right?" Shiko chuckled and responded, "Well, it won't exactly finish them off." Seiki nodded and said, that's why I said almost. Shiko continued to laugh and commented, it's not even almost. It's a clever maneuver to put our enemies in an awkward situation, but it won't necessarily destroy them. However, I must admit it's quite effective. Seiki chuckled and looked at Shiko, asking, do you have a better plan, then? Shiko smiled and replied, no, I don't, but to thoroughly embarrass them, let's highlight their reactions in the news segments of TBS and NHK. Seiki smiled and nodded. Tokyo, Japan. Haneda Airport. Shuaki descended the airplane passenger staircase, and upon reaching the airport, he spotted his parents, his father Ctto Suzuki, and his mother, Yuka Suzuki. Ctto and Yuka embraced their son as he returned. Ctto exclaimed, how have you been in the States? Shuaki smiled and replied, I've been doing well over there. Yuka playfully teased as she noticed her son's smile, are you getting used to the American lifestyle already? Shuaki couldn't help but smile wryly at his mother's words and replied, no way. They love fast foods like hamburgers and pizza, and other greasy foods. If I lived like them, I'd probably become overweight in no time. Upon hearing their son's response, Ctto and Yuka shared a laugh. Ctto then nodded with a sense of relief and said, that's right. You are our only child, so you should maintain discipline and a strong mindset, even in a country as affluent and peaceful, yet full of temptations as the one you've been living in. He paused and locked eyes with his son. Only then can you have the opportunity to rightfully inherit your grandfather's legacy, which should belong to us. Shuaki nodded solemnly upon hearing his father's words. He was aware of his father's ambition to take control of the Suzuki group away from his older brother, the first son of Samaza Suzuki, Shiro Suzuki. However, Shuaki concealed a secret from his parents. He had been living a relaxed and somewhat complacent lifestyle in the USA, even having one-night stands on several occasions. This was a secret he vowed never to reveal to his parents, as he knew it would trigger his father's wrath, which not even his mother could prevent. Observing that the conversation between father and son was drifting toward the topic of claiming the Suzuki group, Yuka interjected, before you two get too absorbed in your ambitious plans, Shuaki, you should start thinking about a thoughtful gift for your grandfather. At her words, both Shuaki and Ctto recalled that Shuaki had returned from the USA to celebrate Sazuma Suzuki's birthday. Ctto placed his hand on Shuaki's shoulder and said, I've previously shared with you your grandpa's preferences, so you should already know what he'd like, right? Shuaki nodded, recalling that he attended his grandfather's birthday every year. He was well aware that his grandfather had a penchant for items like katanas, exquisite calligraphy, ancient Japanese armor collections, and, on occasion, an affinity for fine beers, especially those from Europe. Thus, he had purchased a selection of European beers, including Duvel, Westmalle Triple, Schneider Weiss Tap 7, and more. He had managed to acquire these diverse beers, which he didn't find too costly. He had also arranged to procure some calligraphy from China through his father's connections. However, what Shuaki didn't know was that his grandfather, Sazuma Suzuki, had developed a new appreciation for something quite unexpected: video games. Location: Toshima Ward, Tokyo, Japan. Ikebukuro District. With Kishin's remarkable growth and Shin's rapidly increasing wealth, he made the decision to construct a house in the Ikebukuro district. Despite being a self-made billionaire in US dollars, the house he built had a small and unassuming appearance. Covering approximately 120 sqm, it offered just enough space for a bedroom, a few guest rooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a workout room. The property also featured a swimming pool, which happened to be Luigi, their golden retriever's, favorite spot. As for the Norwegian forest cat, Shin had affectionately named her Zelda. At this moment, Shin was engaged in a discussion with Myra about what gift to present to his grandfather. Shin, he's the founder of a major conglomerate in Japan, so I believe a grand and luxurious car would be the most suitable gift for him. Myra suggested with excitement. Shin chuckled and replied, "That old man hardly knows me. Why should I bother to give him such a gift?" Myra nodded, understanding his perspective. They hadn't even informed Shin's family about their wedding, and it was a fact that Shin's grandfather had shown little interest in Shin. With a mischievous grin, Shin added, "I'll just gift that old man a video game, Dragon Quest, and he'll probably be among the first to play it since it hasn't been released yet." Myra couldn't help but chuckle and laugh at Shin's idea. "You're so mischievous. How could an old man get into playing video games?" Shin chuckled with a grin and said, "That's precisely why I'm giving him an unreleased video game like Dragon Quest. I'm pretty sure he won't have the opportunity to play it in his lifetime." Myra laughed as she playfully pinched Shin, laughing, "Ha ha ha." Chapter 119, Sazuma's Birthday. Tate, Tokyo, Japan. July 30, 1991. Sazuma Suzuki's residence. The celebration for Sazuma was held in the spacious main hall, but the garden was adorned with chabude tables laden with delicious dishes. The garden's atmosphere, complete with a serene pond, lifted everyone's spirits, drawing most of the guests outdoors. Shimizu Mayaga, Sazuma's eldest daughter, graced the party with her husband, Minoru Mayaga, and their only daughter, Etsuko. Mai Suzuki, Sazuma's second daughter, who remained unmarried, was also in attendance. She owned several small businesses in Tokyo. Shira Miyoshi, the third daughter of Sazuma, arrived with her husband, Taito Miyoshi, and their daughter, Kazue Miyoshi. Shiro, along with his wife and children, joined the celebration, dressed in traditional attire. Shiro wore a kimono, his sons donned kakaji, and his daughters were elegantly clad in hakama. Shiko and Seiki respectfully bowed to their grandfather to express their love and respect. Later on, Ctto, along with his wife and son, also joined in celebrating Sazuma's birthday. Shintani Suzuki, Sazuma's third son, attended with his wife, Mei Suzuki, and their son, Atsushi Suzuki. Shigeru Suzuki, the fourth son of Sazuma Suzuki, arrived with his wife, Misaki Suzuki, and their son, Shoji Suzuki. Shintani, Shiro's third brother, joined Ctto's side after warmly greeting their father. Shintani was particularly close to Ctto. On the other hand, Shigeo Suzuki shared a friendly exchange with Shiro as he, along with his wife and son, approached him, saying, "Brother Shiro, how have you been?" Shiro responded with a smile, "I've been doing well." While they were engaged in conversation, guests who were not family members but rather CEOs and company presidents from the business world, many of whom were seniors like Sazuma, also attended the celebration. When Sazuma spotted them, he invited them to participate in a playful samurai fight, which led to bursts of laughter among the guests. These individuals were once Sazuma's friends in the business world, and their influence is still prevalent today. Shiro, the current chairman of the Suzuki Group, engaged in conversations with them, while the vice chairman of the Suzuki Group, Ctto, was equally enthusiastic. Kumiko warmly welcomed the guests who had come to celebrate Sazuma's birthday. Among them was Okuda Toyota, the founder of Toyota Motor Corporation, who shared a similar age with Sazuma. As Okuda Toyota, his white beard resplendent, gazed into Sazuma's eyes, it seemed as if a spark of recognition ignited. Sazuma, his voice resonating with depth, inquired, "Who extended an invitation to you here?" Kumiko stood helplessly and silently by his side. Okuda Toyota chuckled, assisted by his son, Bunko Toyota, who now served as the current chairman of Toyota Motor Corporation. "Old friend, are you taken aback to see me still kicking?" Okuda Toyota laughed as he bantered with Sazuma. The party continued, with the Suzuki siblings, who had reunited, engaged in animated conversations. Shiro occasionally furrowed his brows as he noticed the absence of Shinro. Shoaki, Ctto's son, had already presented his grandfather with a calligraphy piece and a selection of European beers. "Not bad," Sazuma remarked with a nod. Following this, Sazuma's grandsons and granddaughters also bestowed gifts upon the elderly man. Eri, who stood beside Shiro, couldn't help but wonder whether Shinro would attend, given his persistently negative view of the family. Eri and Rookie exchanged glances, realizing that Shiryu was also absent. While these events were unfolding, just 3 minutes earlier, Shin was driving to what he still referred to as his grandfather's residence, with Myra seated beside him. "Are you certain it's okay to bring Luigi and Zelda to the party?" Myra asked with a hint of uncertainty. Luigi, their dog, was gazing out of the car window, while Zelda was peacefully asleep on Myra's lap. Shin simply nodded with a smile and commented, "It doesn't matter." He paused, casting a fond look at Luigi, and added, "Besides, if we leave them alone at home, who knows what kind of chaos they might create." Myra reciprocated the smile, and after a short while, they arrived at the imposing gate of a grand Japanese traditional mansion. As Myra beheld the magnificent mansion, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Your family is incredibly wealthy, Shin." Woof! Woof! Luigi's bark startled Zelda, causing her to look around in confusion while grooming her fur. A man dressed in a black suit, clearly a guard for Suzuki Sazuma's residence, approached Shin and Myra with a furrowed brow. He seemed to think they were tourists who believed Sazuma's mansion was a public attraction. Shin and Myra exchanged glances, and Shin chuckled as he explained, "I've been invited to Sazuma Suzuki's party." The guard furrowed his brows even deeper, then rubbed his chin as he inquired, "May we see your invitation card?" Shin shook his head regretfully, replying, "Unfortunately, I haven't received one." The guard shook his head in response, stating, "I can't confirm your invitation without the card." Myra, growing anxious, rushed to explain, "But the Suzuki family members don't need invitation cards." The guard paused, nodded, and then playfully quipped, "That's true, but that privilege applies only to the Suzuki family." He scrutinized Shin and Myra, along with their dog and cat, before concluding, "I don't believe you're part of the Suzuki family." Myra frowned and retorted, "Are you passing judgment on us?" The man quickly shook his head, saying, "Certainly not." Shin, still wearing a puzzled expression, asked, "Then why do you assume we're not part of the Suzuki family?" The man nodded as he explained, "Every year, during Sazuma-sama's birthday, the Suzuki family gathers to celebrate, and in all the years I've been here, I've never seen the two of you attend his birthday celebration. So, I naturally assumed you're not part of the Suzuki family." Myra's frown deepened as she replied, "So, that's the basis for your assumption that we're not part of the Suzuki family?" The man nodded and firmly stated, "That's correct, miss. So, if I were you, I'd kindly depart this place before we have to involve the authorities." Just as the man had uttered these words, Shiryu, riding his Toyota motorcycle, observed the situation and overheard what the guard had said to Shin and Myra. Without hesitation, Shiryu approached them and declared, "Hey, I have an invitation card." The guard turned his gaze toward Shiryu and Shin, and Myra nodded in recognition as they saw Shiryu's arrival. With a furrowed brow, the guard extended his hand with an open palm and inquired, "May I see the invitation?" Shiryu nodded and handed over the invitation card. The guard examined the elegantly designed golden card and then nodded, saying, "You may enter, sir." Shiryu agreed but also pointed at Shin and Myra, stating, "Yes, and these two individuals are indeed part of the Suzuki family, so they should be allowed entry as well." The guard cast a doubtful look at Shin and Myra and began to explain, "I apologize, sir, but I still can't permit their entry unless they..." The guard had not yet finished his statement when Shin quickly interjected, "Then I'll call my mother, and you can speak to her." He swiftly dialed his mother, Eri. The call was promptly answered, and Shin explained, "Mom, we're currently being stopped by a guard here, and we don't have an invitation card." Eri's voice sounded hurried, and Shin handed the phone to the guard. After listening to the woman's voice and tone, the guard nodded and then bowed to Shin, saying, "I apologize, young master and young lady. You may enter now." He acknowledged his mistake with a bow. Shin and Myra responded with a nod and a smile as they proceeded to enter the mansion alongside Shiryu. Chapter 120, Luigi and Zelda, the two troublemakers. Location, Tate, Tokyo, Japan. Residence of Sazuma Suzuki. As Myra, Shin, and Shiryu passed through the gate, a man escorted them to the mansion, where a woman dressed in a hakama greeted them with a bow. She kindly requested that Shin and Shiryu change into Kakaji, while Myra should switch into a hakama. Shin and Myra initially headed to the changing room together, but the woman in the hakama halted them, saying, "Young master and young lady, please use separate rooms." She was concerned about their privacy, thinking it inappropriate for them to change together. Shin and Myra exchanged knowing glances and smiles. Shin hooked his arm around Myra's shoulder and confidently stated, "She's my wife." Upon hearing this, the woman blushed and bowed, saying, "I apologize, young master and young lady." She was taken aback, unaware that one of Lord Sazuma's grandsons was already married. Later, Shin and Myra changed into their new attire together in the same room. Garden of Sazuma Mansion. Sazuma shared laughter with his former business associates, reminiscing about their shared past in the corporate world. Okuda Toyota enthusiastically commented, "My old friend, I heard that your Suzuki Group introduced a new motorcycle this year with a lightweight aluminum frame and a fuel-injected engine. I must say, I'm impressed, it could rival our classic '79 Toyota Supra." He chuckled as he spoke and took a sip of sake. Sazuma furrowed his brows and retorted, "Hee hee, you old rascal, are you suggesting that my company is behind the times?" Okuda Toyota burst into laughter and replied, "You were the one who said it." Sazuma grew frustrated and took a sip of sake before exclaiming, "I had a feeling it. You're here just to compare your own company to mine." He paused and added, "Besides, why are you comparing your company's cars to my Suzuki motorcycles?" Amid laughter, Okuda Toyota chuckled, and many others from the business world joined in the merriment. Then, Okuda Toyota, wearing a smile, continued, "But your company does have its strengths." He paused and inquired, "You've ventured into the video game industry, haven't you?" Upon hearing this, Bunko Toyota glanced in Shiro's direction. Several business figures had observed the profits in the video game sector but chose not to participate, fearing the risks associated with too many companies entering the fray. Such an influx could create uncertainty, impacting the slowly recovering video game industry and its stakeholders. Sazuma grinned with a hint of mockery, stating, "I must admit my elder son made a savvy move, but I'm not particularly fond of their video games." Katsumi Yamaha, the former chairman of Yamaha Motor Company, who sat with his son and was slightly younger than Sazuma and Okuda, quipped, "You don't like your Suzuki products? Now, that's something new." Ichiro Honda, the former chairman of Honda Motor Company, who was accompanied by his son, nodded in agreement, remarking, "This is indeed a rare occurrence." Even Okuda Toyota, while chuckling, found it unusual that his old friend had reservations about Suzuki's products, especially those related to video games. He ventured, "Is it because you dislike video games?" He paused, a smile playing on his lips, and continued, "Perhaps it's because you almost lost your business to arcades in the past." He suspected this might be the reason, but Sazuma shook his head in disagreement. With a smile, Sazuma clarified, "No, it's not that I dislike video games because of past financial troubles." Okuda, Ichiro, and Katsumi regarded Sazuma with a hint of surprise. Sazuma went on to say, still smiling, "In truth, I'm quite fond of modern video games, and I've even developed a mild addiction to them." To their astonishment, Okuda and the others reacted, "Really?" Sazuma nodded, accompanied by a chuckle. Ichiro Honda expressed his surprise, "Then why don't you like your Suzuki video games?" Sazuma nodded and explained, "I may not care for my own Suzuki video games, but He paused, chuckling, and concluded, I'm quite a fan of Kishan's video games. Okuda Toyota smiled and commented, ah, that emerging company? My son mentioned it to me. He glanced at Bunko Toyota, who nodded in agreement. Sazuma nodded in response to his intrigued old friends, adding, indeed, that company might be small at the moment, but their video games consistently captivate me. As Sazuma and his old friends engaged in conversation, Shiro noticed that two of his sons were still absent. He turned to Eri and asked, did you really invite those two troublemakers? Eri hurriedly nodded and reassured him, Shinro just called me and mentioned they were momentarily delayed by a guard, but they should be arriving shortly. Shiro nodded and then turned his attention to Ctto and Shintani, who were instructing the staff on food and cake preparations for the garden celebration. Shuaki, Ctto's son, approached them and greeted, how are you doing, Uncle Shiro and Aunt Eri? Shiro's expression softened as he nodded and inquired, I'm doing well. How about you? How's life treating you in the US? Eri also nodded in greeting. Shuaki smiled and replied, I'm doing well. Shiko and Seiki also joined them and greeted Shuaki. Shiko beamed as he said, you've grown into a fine young man, Shuaki. Seiki nodded with a smile and added, he's become quite tall and handsome, even more than me now. Shuaki appeared flattered as he shook his head and said, me? Handsome? That's not true. He paused, gazing at Shiko and Seiki, and continued, I think you two are even taller and more handsome. Shiko and Seiki exchanged glances and quickly shook their heads, replying, Sanako to nai desu, that's not true. Afterward, they engaged in a conversation with each other. Welcome to the Japanese world, where compliments are often denied and reciprocated with more praise, creating a delightful exchange of modesty. Shin, Myra, and Chiruya had changed into their traditional attire. As Shin and Myra looked at the woman who had assisted them earlier, Shin inquired, where are Luigi and Zelda? Seeing the woman's confusion, Shin clarified, there are Golden Retriever and Norwegian Forest Cat. The woman's face finally registered recognition, and she replied, oh, they've already gone to the garden. Shin and Myra exchanged surprised glances, and Shin exclaimed, they beat us there. The woman smiled helplessly as she explained, don't worry, one of the staff is looking after them. Meanwhile, in the garden, Luigi and Zelda made their entrance, capturing the attention of some of the guests. Woof! Exclaimed the Golden Retriever, his tongue hanging out in excitement. Oh, a Golden Retriever! What a cute cat! Reina, Etsuko, and Kazue, engaged in a conversation, spotted the dog and cat. Reina exclaimed, wow! I never knew Grandpa and Grandma had pets. Etsuko, with her blonde-dyed hair, chuckled and remarked, it's not unusual for older folks to have a dog and a cat. Kazue, with black hair and light makeup, added, this is the first time I've seen them, though. Kumiko, who was some distance away, also looked at the dog and cat with confusion. Reina approached the dog and cat to caress their fur, but the two animals became alarmed and avoided her touch. Kazue and Etsuko, standing nearby, suggested, let's call Grandma, maybe they'll be more approachable if she's around. Reina nodded, and when they spoke to their Grandma Kumiko, she simply said, those aren't our pets. Reina and the others were taken aback as they looked at the Golden Retriever and Norwegian cat. Kumiko turned to one of the staff and inquired, who allowed pets to enter the garden. The staff member, part of the celebration party's team, responded, they belong to one of the guests, madam. Kumiko frowned, as she couldn't recall any guests with pets on the guest list. The staff explained, they are the pets of one of your grandsons, madam. Kumiko, Reina, and the others were taken by surprise. Kumiko glanced at each of her grandsons Atsushi, Shuji, Shuaki, and even Shiko and Seiki. However, they all seemed engrossed in their own activities, and when they occasionally glanced at the dog and cat, they paid no special attention to them. Frowning, Kumiko wondered which of her grandsons owned the two pets. Chapter 121, Sazuma's and Everyone's Surprises. Sazuma Mansion's Garden. As Kumiko's confusion grew, a staff member pointed through the open sliding door of the mansion, exclaiming, "It's them, madam," while indicating the man and woman. Kumiko turned to observe Shinro and Myra, who graced the garden party with their presence, accompanied by Shiryu. Frowning, Kumiko struggled to recall who Shin and Myra were, though she faintly recognized Shinro. Amid her confusion, Eri, Shiro's wife, approached Myra, Shinro, and Shiryu. After greeting her second son, Eri, along with Rookie, warmly embraced Shinro and Myra, asking, "You two are finally here." Shin then turned his attention to their pets, saying, "Let me retrieve Luigi and Zelda first." Much to the surprise of Reina, who watched as his fourth brother suddenly appeared with a frown, Shin took the two troublemakers. Shin and Myra nodded to Eri, and Shin passed the cat to Myra. Then, Shin directed his gaze particularly at his distant father, who momentarily acknowledged him before turning away. Eri noticed this and said to Shin and Shiryu, "You two, come and greet your father." Shin remained silent until Shiryu patted his shoulder, and Myra smiled at him as she nodded. Shin finally agreed and approached Shiro with Shiryu, while Eri and Rookie followed. Myra walked closely behind. Shiro maintained his silence as his two least favorite sons approached him. He snorted lightly and said, "You two. Please have a seat," casually glancing at the clingy dog in Shin's hands but choosing to ignore it. Shin and Shiryu nodded and took seats at Shiro's table. Shiro poured sake into their cups and remarked, "You two have really grown. Especially considering you work for a small yet growing company like Kishan." Shin and Shiryu exchanged glances upon hearing this. Shiryu thought with a faint smile, "It seems father still doesn't know that Shin owns Kishan, he only knows Shin works there." Noticing his son's silence, Shiro continued, "I'm not against you working for that company, but do you prefer to be mere employees of a small company instead of owning shares in our Suzuki group?" Shin and Shiryu shared a look, and Shiryu chuckled, "Father, even if I remain a humble artist at Kishan, I'll stay because it fulfills my dream." Shiro nodded and turned to Shinro, who said, "That's the same for me, father." Shiro sighed, "You two are as stubborn as ever." He continued the conversation with his sons, this time less strict, realizing that they were still his sons, even if they didn't meet his expectations. He chose not to praise them, considering their choices to be less than admirable in his eyes. Meanwhile, Shiko and Seiki, along with Shuaki and Shuji, noticed Shiro conversing with two young individuals. Shuaki playfully remarked, "Aren't those your two wayward brothers?" Shuji simply smiled and sipped his sake, while Shiko and Seiki frowned but remained silent. While Shiro was in conversation with his two sons, he was approached by his mother, Kumiko, with Reina and the others closely following. Shiro stopped chatting with his sons and turned to his mother, saying, "Oh, mother." Kumiko nodded as she observed Shinro and Shiryu, who were wearing Kakaji attire, her curiosity piqued. She inquired, "Who are these two young men?" She faintly recognized Shinro, and she had a vague sense of familiarity with Shiko, but her memory failed her. Shiro offered a wry smile as he explained, "Mother, I forgot to reintroduce them to you. These are Shinro and Shiryu, my second and fourth sons." Upon hearing this, Kumiko looked surprised and exclaimed, "My two grandsons." She then hugged Shinro and Shiryu affectionately. On the side, Reina regarded Shinro and Shiryu with a grim expression. Kumiko pouted as she turned her gaze back to Shiro, her brows furrowed in reproach. "Seriously, Shiro-kun? It's your father's 88th birthday, and you only introduce me to my two grandsons now." Shiro remained silent, acknowledging that he had hesitated to invite his two sons due to the potential mockery from his brothers and sisters. However, his fatherly instinct had ultimately guided his decision. Sure enough, his first sister, Shimizu, and second sister, Mai, were already discussing Shiro's two sons, though Shiro's third sister, Shira, remained silent. Ctto and Shintani wore disdainful smiles as they looked at Shiro's two sons. Look, that one is the second son of our elder brother, a man working in the entertainment industry, Ctto quietly mocked to Shintani, who stifled a faint laugh. And the other one is the youngest, seemingly without a clear purpose in life. The other guests from the business world also overheard Ctto's words and chuckled discreetly. Subsequently, the guests turned their attention to Shiro's two sons, engaging in quiet conversations that drew Sazuma Suzuki's notice. Okuda Toyota chuckled and remarked to Sazuma Suzuki, "Hey, aren't those another two of your grandsons?" He pointed towards Shinro and Shiryu. Sazuma Suzuki furrowed his brows, appearing perplexed as he responded, "My two grandsons." Okuda Toyota and the others exchanged glances and chuckled. Okuda Toyota added, "You didn't even know you had two more grandsons. Poor you." Sazuma Suzuki felt embarrassed, his face reddening slightly as he gazed at Shinro and Shiryu. After a while of conversation with his old friends, Sazuma Suzuki approached Shiro's table where he was with his two grandsons. Shiro, Kumiko, and the others noticed Sazuma Suzuki's approach. Kumiko instructed Shinro and Shiryu, saying, "This is your grandfather, greet him." With all eyes on them, Shinro and Shiryu bowed simultaneously to Sazuma Suzuki, who simply nodded. Sazuma Suzuki, wearing a serious expression, commented, "I never expected that my elder son was hiding two more grandsons from me." He glanced at Shiro, who chuckled helplessly, clarifying that he hadn't intentionally hidden Shinro and Shiryu, as they had attended his father's party when they were younger. Sazuma Suzuki then inquired about Shinro and Shiryu's well-being, and they responded briefly. Myra stood silently beside Shin, and after a while, Shiryu presented his gift, saying, "Happy 88th birthday, grandfather. Here is my gift," and offered a selection of his music albums. The guests couldn't help but chuckle at such an unusual gift. Shoki playfully commented to Shiko and Seiki, "He presented our grandfather with his album, hee." Shiko and Seiki remained silent in response. Sazuma Suzuki examined the album closely, and what caught his attention was the Kishan logo. He exclaimed, "Oh! This is from Kishan." Shiryu was pleasantly surprised that his grandfather knew about Kishan, and he nodded, saying, "That's right." Sazuma Suzuki stroked his chin and commented, "Not bad." The other grandsons of Sazuma and the guests assumed that their grandfather had made the comment to spare Shiryu's feelings. They then turned their attention to Shinro, the youngest grandson, to see his gift. Shin smiled and decided to make a surprising introduction. He addressed his unsuspecting grandfather and the guests, saying, "Before I present my gift, grandfather, let me introduce you to my wife, Myra." His announcement left everyone in shock. Shiro, who had been sipping sake, set his cup down and stared at Myra in disbelief. He looked at his wife for confirmation, and she simply nodded. In shock, Shiro asked, "You already knew?" Eri, feeling somewhat embarrassed, also nodded in confirmation. Shiko and Seiki exchanged shocked glances as they observed Shinro and Myra, who held a cat. Shoki playfully exclaimed, "Would you look at that? He's already married before you two." Okuda Toyota and the others joined in laughter, noticing Sazuma Suzuki's frozen expression. Kumiko also gasped, her hand covering her mouth, and Reina stared at Shin with wide eyes, remarking, "That brat actually got married before me." Shortly after, Sazuma Suzuki broke into laughter, saying, "Ha ha ha. So." He paused as all the guests awaited his response. Sazuma then continued, "Your gift? Was your gift to me a great-grandchild?" His words prompted laughter from everyone. Shin and Myra exchanged glances, and Shin chuckled, "Of course not." He retrieved something from his pocket and handed it to his grandfather, saying, "This is my gift." What Shin handed to Sazuma Suzuki was a video game, Dragon Quest. Sazuma Suzuki examined the video game cartridge with curiosity, and when he noticed the Kishan logo, his eyes widened with pleasant surprise. The most surprising thing for Sazuma Suzuki was the Kishan video game. He had never seen one before, even more so than his grandson's revelation about being married. He completely disregarded the fact that he hadn't been invited to the wedding. Kumiko, on the other hand, immediately struck up a conversation with Myra in surprise, finding it difficult to believe that one of her grandsons was married. In the meantime, Sazuma Suzuki silently examined the video game cartridge, leaving Shin to assume the old man was a bit bewildered, so he just chuckled. Little did Shin know that the old man, who initially wanted his grandsons to participate in katana drills, was now considering cancelling the drills because of this surprisingly unexpected video game gift. The katana drills had mostly served as a disciplinary measure and a way to tease his grandsons. But now, he no longer had the desire to initiate them, all he wanted was to dive into playing Dragon Quest. Perhaps he would jump straight into a Super Mario competition, which could last for hours if they aimed to complete all the game stages. Sazuma Suzuki's idea was to have each of his grandsons play Super Mario Bros. And see who could achieve the highest score on stage 1-1 to determine the winner. Some of the guests believed that Sazuma Suzuki didn't like the gift, and Shoaki, along with a few others, were already snickering at Shin. Sazuma Suzuki looked at Shin and asked with a serious expression, "Where did you get this video game cartridge?" Shin, not minding the question and thinking the old man didn't like the gift, responded, "It's from my company. What do you think?" Chapter 122, Shinro-en. Sazuma's mansion residence. Sazuma and the other guests overheard Shinro claim that the cartridge came from his company. The attendees and the Suzuki family examined the cartridge held by Sazuma, but it was difficult to discern its exact nature. Sazuma's eyes widened as he gazed at Shin and exclaimed, "From your company." Shin offered a faint smile, observing his grandfather's surprised reaction, suspecting that the gift might have upset him. Casually, Shin quipped, "What do you think?" while chuckling, playfully teasing the elderly man and the other guests at the party. Among the Suzuki family's grandchildren and a few guests, concern grew about Shin's fate, fearing he might be asked to leave the birthday celebration and never welcomed back. However, what caught everyone off guard was Sazuma's astonished gaze fixed on Shin, his voice tinged with bewilderment as he inquired, "What's your name again?" The guests and the Suzuki family were taken aback by Sazuma-sama's unexpected question. Some questioned silently, "Why is the elderly gentleman asking for his name?" while others wondered, could he be experiencing a mental issue like Alzheimer's? Shin observed the old man with a furrowed brow, pondering, "Why does he want to know my name?" and then speculated, "Perhaps he intends to remember my name so he can harbor a lifelong grudge, or he wants to ensure my name isn't mentioned among his grandsons." All these thoughts flashed through Shin's mind in an instant. Before Shin could respond, his father, Shiro, regarded Sazuma with a furrowed brow. Suspecting that Sazuma might feel offended by Shin's gift, Shiro addressed his father, saying, "What's troubling you, father? Don't you appreciate my youngest son's present?" Seeing Sazuma remain silent, his gaze still fixed on Shin, Shiro added, "If you're displeased, father, please return it to my youngest son, and I'll ensure he prepares a better gift for you." Shiro was unable to complete his sentence before Sazuma fixed him with widened eyes and erupted in anger, "Are you out of your mind? Do you expect me to return this splendid gift? I wouldn't trade this gift for 100 million yen, let alone give it back." The guests and the Suzuki family who heard Sazuma's words were left in awe, their attention drawn to the cartridge in his right hand. Okuda Toyota and Sazuma's other friends examined the cartridge with curiosity, Okuda Toyota wondering, what could it be? Shin's uncles and aunties wore expressions of shock upon hearing his words. Shiko, Seiki, Shoaki, and Shoji, as well as Reina and the other granddaughters, appeared equally bewildered and taken aback. Eri, Shin's mother, and Ruki, his second sister, shared looks of mild surprise. Yet, Shin and Myra were equally astonished, exchanging glances while Shin slightly narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, father?" Shiro asked in surprise upon hearing his father's words. Sazuma turned to look back at the cartridge and then, with astonishment, asked Shiro, "Don't you recognize this cartridge?" Shiro and everyone who heard Sazuma's words thought to themselves, "How could we possibly know?" Though they harbored these thoughts silently, they couldn't help but be intrigued by what cartridge could provoke such a reaction from the elderly Sazuma. Ctto, Shiro's second brother and Sazuma's second son, approached Sazuma and inquired, "Father, what cartridge is it?" His curiosity piqued, he couldn't help but wonder about the nature of the gift Shinro had given to the old man. Sazuma, however, remained unresponsive and continued to focus on Shin. He repeated his question, "You told me it's from your company, and I've never seen these video game cartridges before." He paused and then asked, "Tell me your name again." While Ctto's face reddened slightly from being ignored, the guests in the Suzuki family paid no mind to him, their attention wholly fixated on why Sazuma persisted in asking for Shinro's name. All eyes were on Shin as he furrowed his brows and addressed the old man Sazuma with confusion, saying, "I'm not sure why you're asking, and my father introduced me, but I can tell you." His words hung in the air as the crowd watched with various expressions, ranging from curiosity to a mix of feelings, particularly among the Suzuki family members. Sazuma gazed at Shin with eager anticipation as the credits rolled at the end of Kishan's masterpiece video games, reminiscent of classics like Super Mario Bros. Shin, seemingly unconcerned, replied, "My name is Shinro Suzuki." He paused and observed the old man's expression slowly transform into one of shock, silently wondering, what's wrong with this old man? What Shin remained unaware of was that Sazuma's mind was already racing with thoughts like, Shinro and Sony. Shinro Suzuki. And the realization began to dawn, Shinro. Could my grandson be the owner of Kishin? While those around did not react strongly to Shinro's name, they couldn't ignore the profound shock etched across the old man's face. Sazuma's sons and daughters Shiro, Ctto, Shintani, Shigeo, Shimizu, Mai, Shira approached their wide-eyed father with concern. Ctto urgently inquired, "What's the matter, father?" Kumiko, Sazuma's wife, also drew near, her eyes fixed on her husband. Shintani, the third son, known for his intimidating demeanor, lashed out at Shinro, exclaiming, "What have you done to him, you rascal?" Ctto added his voice, "Your gift has infuriated your grandfather to the point of speechlessness." Their wives joined in, accusing Shin in front of the assembled guests. The guests, including Okuda Toyota, shared amused glances. Okuda leaned into his son, Bunko Toyota, and remarked, "Look, this is like a drama." His words were hushed, but several attendees and onlookers couldn't help but stifle their chuckles. Shin and Myra exchanged frowns, baffled by the situation. They couldn't comprehend what they had done wrong. Yet, Shin couldn't help but speculate that the old man might be experiencing a heart attack due to the perceived insult of the gift. Shiro and Eri found themselves drawn into an argument with Shin's uncles and aunts who accused their son. Shiro firmly retorted, "My son didn't do anything." Eri added with reason, "Let's please be rational. My son hasn't done anything wrong." Shigeo, Sazuma's fourth son, stood by Shiro and Eri, supporting their defense of Shin. While some of Sazuma's grandsons and granddaughters appeared concerned, beneath those expressions lurked a sense of satisfaction that Shin was shouldering the blame. Seiki mused, "Oh, the fourth brother. Why did you return and bring us this embarrassment?" Meanwhile, Shiko pondered, "The fourth one only brings trouble." Reina couldn't help but chuckle, thinking, "What can you expect from a man who got married before me?" As she observed her grandfather, who stood there like a frozen statue. Yet, a growing concern was shared among them, is the old man having a heart attack or something? Shoki, appearing anxious on the surface, harbored secret hopes. I hope the old man left me some of Suzuki's shares. And he wasn't alone, many others within the Suzuki family were nursing similar thoughts. While Shiro had already called for medical assistance, Sazuma's sons and daughters surrounded the elderly man, cloaked in concern. However, Sazuma abruptly snapped out of his thoughts and bellowed in anger, "All of you, get away from me!" Ctto and the rest were taken aback. Ctto inquired, "But, father?" Sazuma roared once more, "Get out of my sight!" With no choice but to comply, Sazuma's sons and daughters retreated, giving the old man some space. Then, in a swift and surprising turn of events, Sazuma rushed to grab hold of Shin, who was about to depart with Myra. Astonishment filled the room as everyone watched Sazuma firmly grasp Shin's shoulder. Sazuma erupted with excitement, exclaiming, "Don't tell me! You're Shinro and Sony!" Upon hearing Sazuma's words, a wave of emotions swept through the room. Some were filled with mixed feelings, others were left confused, a few were shocked, several were astonished, a couple were even petrified, and many simply couldn't believe it. However, the two who found it most difficult to accept this revelation were Shiko and Seiki. Why? Their disbelief stemmed from the fact that they had frequently enjoyed playing Kishin's video games in their leisure hours and had a vague familiarity with the name Shinro and Sony, which appeared in the ending credits of Kishin's iconic video games. Chapter 123, The Shocking Reveal and the Real Big Shots. Sazuma's Mansion Garden. As Sazuma's exclamation left most of the guests and the Suzuki family feeling perplexed, Shin's gaze locked onto the elderly Sazuma, his expression one of astonishment. Similar to Myra, she couldn't help but wonder, he knows Shin's pen name. Sazuma observed Shin's surprised countenance and, with a sly grin, inquired, "I knew it. You're the founder of Kishin's company, aren't you?" As Sazuma's words reached the ears of the attendees, those who had been bewildered by the elderly man's earlier outburst finally grasped the truth. Okuda Toyota glanced at his son, Bunko Toyota, and blurted out, that youngest grandson of that old gentleman Sazuma was the founder of Kishin. Bunko Toyota furrowed his brow and, respectfully responding to his father, remarked, "Based on my information, Shinro and Sony was the founder of Kishin Electronics." Katsumi Yamaha whispered in pleasant surprise, "It's incredible. That old Sazuma actually has such a remarkable grandson." Ichiro Honda, gazing at Sazuma, muttered with a touch of envy, "Darn it! It should have been me. He he he." The other influential elderly gentleman simply chuckled softly at Ichiro Honda's words. Meanwhile, a mixture of expressions filled the faces of the guests and the Suzuki family. Standing near Sazuma, Ctto expressed his disbelief, that can't be true, can it?" Shiko and Seiki exchanged complex looks as they fixed their gaze on Shin. It was hard for them to fathom. While Shoki and Shoji wore expressions of disbelief as they gazed at Shin, they thought, "Unbelievable, he's actually they." Reina, with wide-eyed amazement, fixed her stare on Shin, thinking, "I never expected this." Shiro, utterly shocked, couldn't conceal his surprise as he looked at Shin. He had never anticipated that his youngest son was the owner of Kishin. Shiro then noticed that his wife, seated beside their second daughter, didn't react much to his father Sazuma's words. Shiro couldn't help but think, "Darn it! Could it be she's known all along and kept me in the dark?" As he contemplated this, embarrassment washed over him, especially since he had recently advised Shin to give up working at Kishin, completely unaware that Shin was the owner. Meanwhile, Shin and Myra exchanged glances, both feeling somewhat helpless. They hadn't anticipated that a simple prank of giving Sazuma a video game cartridge would unveil Shin's true identity so soon. Then, Sazuma exclaimed while pointing at Myra, "Her name is Myra, right?" Her name was also featured in the Super Mario Bros. Ending credits. Shin and Myra were left utterly speechless this time, wondering, could it be this old man was playing video games? Everyone, including the guests, Suzuki family members, Sazuma's grandchildren, and Shin's uncles and aunts, gazed at Shin with expressions of disbelief as Sazuma's words all but confirmed that Shinro was likely the owner of Kishin. Kumiko also stole a glance at her youngest grandson, thinking, so, he's the one who created those video games my husband is so infatuated with. Shiro gazed at Shin with a deep seriousness, and as everyone's eyes fixed on the scene, he posed the question with a trembling voice and a tone of disbelief, are you truly? I mean, really, the owner of Kishin, Shin? Myra noticed that all eyes were on Shin, eagerly awaiting confirmation of whether he was indeed the mastermind behind the burgeoning company, Kishin Electronics, the one responsible for revitalizing the video game industry. Shin couldn't help but chuckle as the weight of the moment settled on him. His two brothers, Shiko and Seiki, wore expressions as if they had seen something completely unexpected. His cousins' faces contorted with unsightly expressions, particularly Shoaki. His elder sister, Reina, looked at Shin in disbelief, while his uncles and aunts, especially the one who had accused him earlier, observed him with a mixture of complicated thoughts and expressions. The guests, intrigued, kept their eyes fixed on the mysterious young founder of Kishin. And then, his father, with a serious yet incredulous expression, was locked in a gaze with him. People can be so diverse. Shin thought with a chuckle as all eyes remained on him. He smiled at his grandfather Sazuma and his father, Shiro, and declared with pride and confidence, yes, I am the owner of Kishin. His words sent ripples of wonder through everyone present. Okuda Toyota and the others initially gazed at Shin with uncertainty, but as Shin confirmed it, they couldn't help but be astounded by how young the Kishin founder was. According to rumors, the founder of Kishin was indeed youthful, but they hadn't anticipated just how young. Shinro Suzuki, the self-proclaimed young founder of Kishin Electronics, was not even 20 yet. It was no wonder that many of the guests found it hard to believe that such a young man had managed to establish a burgeoning business, even with the support of his family. And, from the looks of it, the youngest grandson of Sazuma Suzuki hadn't received any support from the Suzuki group. He's so young. It's a shame he's already married. What a promising young man. The guests engaged in hushed discussions amongst themselves, but the Suzuki family paid them little attention as they observed Shin with a range of expressions. Suddenly, Shoaki and Shoji began to feel a sense of inadequacy, both due to the attention Shin was now receiving and the realization that he was already managing his own business separate from the family enterprise. Sazuma, Shiro, Ctto, and the others fixed their eyes on Shin, each displaying a different array of expressions. Shiro, in a moment of reflection, looked at Shinro with a gaze full of complexity and said, "Life is truly unpredictable. It turns out, the son I had the least expectations for is the founder and owner of a company that has managed to make a noticeable impact on the world." Upon hearing Shiro's words, the guests and the Suzuki family members found themselves sharing the same sentiment. Life's unpredictability became evident. A person who had often been the subject of mockery was secretly working to outdo others all along. However, Shiro's gaze rested on Shin, who wore a smug smile, and he spoke with utmost seriousness, "But remember, my son, business is no laughing matter. One misstep may be forgivable, two can still be rectified, but repeated or numerous missteps can spell the downfall of your company." He imparted this wisdom because, deep inside, despite his disbelief that his son, who had been a source of headaches in the past, was now the owner of the growing Kishin, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Shiko and Seiki, however, did not share the same sentiment. They harbored a constant, underlying anger and embarrassment, suspecting that Shin might have been playing with them for some time, particularly when they recalled their past attempts to invest in Kishin. Sazuma, on the other hand, concurred with his elder son Shiro's advice and gave Shin a nod of approval. He then broke into joyous laughter, continually patting Shin's shoulder, his tone filled with delight. "Ha ha ha, this is truly fascinating. My grandson is the one behind Kishin, the company responsible for the video games I've been infatuated with. The guests chuckled at Sazuma's actions and words, privately thinking, the old Sazuma is actually a gamer. Hee. Shoaki, who had initially expected to witness Shinro's embarrassment, couldn't help but bite his lower lip in frustration. Yuka, Shito's wife and Shoaki's mother, sought to console her son, whispering, "Don't be envious of that scoundrel. He's merely a minnow compared to the Suzuki Group. If you can ever acquire the Suzuki Group, then you can easily overshadow him and his company." She spoke with a chuckle. Upon hearing his mother's words, Shoaki managed to regain his composure and nodded, albeit with a slightly forced smile. They weren't the only ones entertaining such thoughts. Almost everyone from Suzuki family who felt envious of Shiro's family and Shin's success had similar notions. After all, the Suzuki Group held a prestigious position as one of the top 500 global companies, currently ranked 40th in the world. It was only natural for people to have such aspirations. However, for the guests attending the Sazuma Suzuki event, individuals like Okuda Toyota and Bunko Toyota seemed to be relishing the dramatic display offered by the Suzuki family. In fact, some of the guests, including Yamaha, Honda, and others, were also part of the top 500 global companies. The most influential among them at this gathering was Toyota Motor, which held the prestigious 10th rank on the global list. Chapter 124, Unexpected Offer. Sazuma's Mansion Garden. Kumiko beamed with joy for her youngest grandson, offering Myra a warm compliment. "Hehe, you're married to such a wonderful man, and he's one of my grandsons, after all." Her voice was tinged with pride, and Myra responded with a wry smile. Kumiko continued, her tone turning more serious, "Please take care of him, and." Her gaze suddenly turned icy as she fixed her eyes on Myra, her words carrying indifference. "Don't ever betray my young and exceptional grandson, all right?" Myra, feeling the shift in Kumiko's demeanor, nodded anxiously. After all, why would she even consider cheating when Shin possessed such, well, remarkable qualities in certain areas? At times, it reached a point where she found herself pleading for him to stop. However, whether Shin would relent depended on his mood, and even when she begged him to stop, she still yearned for more. Her body constantly craved his touch to the extent that, by the end of the day, she wanted Shin all to herself, even if it meant a bit of suffering. Observing Myra's changing expression, Kumiko smiled knowingly and remarked, "It seems you're at least content, doesn't it?" Myra, hearing Kumiko's teasing words, Shin's grandmother, blushed even deeper. Meanwhile, Shin was being dragged away by his grandfather to impress his old friends. Sazuma Suzuki's aged voice filled the air as he proudly declared, "Look, my old buddies. I have a grandson who's rapidly climbing the ranks in the business world." Samaza's satisfaction grew as he observed the annoyed expressions of his old friends, especially Okuda Toyota, who often boasted about his company's superiority to Suzuki Group. Okuda Toyota scrutinized Shin closely and remarked with confidence and pride, "Hehe, good for you, old Sazuma, now you have another small company to boast about." Katsumi Yamaha then inquired with a chuckle, "Young man, do you intend to merge your company with the Suzuki Group to help your grandfather's company grow?" Ichiro Honda also nodded in agreement, saying, "That does seem like a wise idea." Sazuma Suzuki and the guests, particularly those from the Suzuki family, fixed their expectant gazes on Shin. He sat there, calmly sipping sake, his expression unreadable. It was evident that the young man had a remarkable ability to maintain a composed demeanor, even though the prospect of merging the Kishan company with Suzuki Group was undoubtedly enticing. It promised substantial expansion, albeit with the condition that Suzuki Group would gain control of the company. In the meantime, Shin's father, uncles, cousins, and his two brothers, Shiko and Seiki, also embraced the idea with great anticipation. "Please agree," silently wished Shiro, Sazuma, and nearly everyone within the Suzuki family, their desire to acquire such a rapidly growing company proving irresistible. Shin remained silent, wearing a faint smile. Before he could respond, Sazama made a persuasive offer, saying, "If you agree, I'll give you half of my shares in Suzuki Group." These words stunned the Suzuki family. Some of Sazama's sons and daughters attempted to dissuade their father, with Ctto urging, "Don't do it, father. It's not worth it." Shimizu, Shinro's aunt, nodded in agreement, adding, "That's right." Shintani's eyes widened as he chimed in, "Second brother Ctto is correct, father." However, Shiro did not intervene. Instead, he continued to gaze intently at Shin, filled with anticipation. Sazama then spoke with an annoyed expression, directed at his sons and daughters who opposed his decision, "All of you, be quiet." His words not only startled his own children but also the guests. However, some among the guests and members of the Suzuki family could faintly understand Sazama's perspective. After all, Kishan was a company with such potential that it could conceivably pose a future challenge even to the formidable Suzuki Group. Meanwhile, Myra glanced at Shin, eager to learn his response to the offer made by the founder of the Suzuki Group. Shin responded by smiling at their offers and letting out a faint chuckle. "Hee hee." Pausing as all eyes fixated on him, he continued with an emotionless tone, "I have no interest in the Suzuki Group whatsoever." Shin poured sake into his cup, addressing the shocked expressions of Sazama and the others. While some enjoyed the dramatic turn of events, he added, "I built my company entirely on my own, with the help and support of the people who work in my company." Shin paused, his gaze resting on Myra, as he added, "Including my wife, who has supported me from the beginning." Everyone in the room looked at Shin, with many having half expected his rejection of the offer. Okuda Toyota laughed at Sazama Suzuki's disappointment, saying, "Would you look at that? Your grandson didn't agree, hee hee." Shiro couldn't help but feel disappointed, while Ctto, Shoaki, and others were relieved that Shin had not accepted, considering the significant share Sazama held in Suzuki Group. Shiko and Seiki exchanged glances and couldn't help but view their younger brother's decision as unwise. They believed that Shin was unaware of the magnitude of their grandfather Sazama's shares in the Suzuki Group. Meanwhile, the granddaughters, like Reina and Kazue, remained oblivious to the significance of their grandfather Sazama's shares. The elder Sazama Suzuki made another attempt to persuade his grandson, Shin, saying, "Can't you reconsider, my dear grandson? My shares in Suzuki Group amount to 13%, valued at 572 billion yen. Think about it." He looked at Shin with hopeful anticipation. Shin maintained his smile and replied with little change in emotion, "Honestly, the idea of instant wealth is quite tempting. Suzuki Group boasts a market capitalization of 4.4 trillion yen and an overall net worth of 3.3 trillion yen. It's undeniably a massive company. However, I must decline." He paused, still smiling, and turned to his grandfather Sazama, adding, "I apologize for that, grandfather." While Sazama's old friends secretly chuckled, Sazama let out a helpless sigh and conceded, "Very well, I can't force you." Following that, Shin, his grandfather Sazama, and Sazama's old friends engaged in conversation. Sazama introduced an unexpected competition, a high-score showdown in Super Mario Bros. "We'll see who can achieve the highest score in Super Mario Bros., Stage 1-1. The winner will receive 10 million yen from me," Sazama Suzuki declared with enthusiasm. While most of the guests and Suzuki family members regarded the 10 million yen as a relatively small amount, they were genuinely intrigued by the Super Mario Bros. Competition. Their occasional glances at Shin emphasized the fact that Super Mario Bros. Was a creation of the Kishan company. Approaching Shin, Shiko and Seiki couldn't help but comment on his achievements. Shiko smiled faintly and remarked, "Look at this. You've grown to the point where you have your own a small company now." Seiki chimed in, "You're quite sly, little brother. Why didn't you inform us that you own Kishin?" Shin responded with a smug grin, saying, "I didn't see the need." Shiko and Seiki exchanged glances, realizing that while everyone, including the guests and their parents and grandparents, was preoccupied with their own affairs, Ctto seized the opportunity to approach Shin discreetly. He whispered into Shin's ear, "Don't let your pride go to your head, little brother. Suzuki will soon trample your small and budding video game-focused company." Only Shin and Seiki, who were nearby, caught Ctto's words. Shin maintained his faint smile and appeared unfazed by his elder brother's taunt. He replied with a calm tone and a smile, "Feel free to give it a shot." Chapter 125, Dilemma. Sazuma Mansion's garden. Ctto and Seiki exchanged glances as they observed Shin, who had grown so self-assured that he could maintain composure in their presence. Ctto couldn't help but snort, remarking, "Your newfound confidence is solely due to a small successful business venture." Seiki nodded in agreement, adding, "Remember when you couldn't even meet our eyes?" He peered at Shin, who was now looking them in the eye while holding a cup of sake. With a smile, Shin responded, "What can I say? Times have changed." Afterward, he left to join Myra, brushing off the disapproving expressions on his two brothers' faces. In Shin's absence, Ctto and Seiki clenched their teeth and Ctto abandoned his sake, but they made sure not to reveal their inner turmoil to the guests, lest they embarrass themselves. Observing Shin converse with his two brothers, Myra whispered, "Did you manage to talk to them effectively?" She was aware that Shin had a strained relationship with his first and third brothers. Shin noticed the concern in Myra's expression and responded with a reassuring smile, speaking calmly, "Don't worry. I was able to have a productive conversation with them." Myra nodded, and then she, along with Shin, joined in the Super Mario Bros. Competition hosted by Sazuma Suzuki. To everyone's surprise, Myra emerged as the winner, and Sazuma Suzuki chuckled, saying, "You are truly a worthy wife for my grandson. You've achieved the high score, and therefore, you've won 10 million yen. Overjoyed, Myra hugged Shin, but her realization of the many onlookers around caused her to blush shyly. The guests shared light laughter at Myra's actions and reactions, while some members of the Suzuki family simply cast indifferent glances, unmoved by her victory of a mere 10 million yen in their eyes. Subsequently, several guests gathered around Shin and Myra, engaging in conversations about their business. Before long, Shin's family joined them: his father, mother, and two sisters, Rookie and Reina. With a sigh of relief, Rookie directed her gaze at Shin and Myra and commented, "I'm glad you've finally opened up to the family, Shin." She felt the weight of keeping Shin's marital status and his successful company, Kishan, a secret, and she wasn't alone. Their mother, Eri, shared in her sense of relief. Meanwhile, Reina cast a sardonic look at Shin and quipped, "Little brother, now that you're rich, can you spare me 100 million yen? When Shiro and Eri heard their eldest daughter's audacious request for 100 million yen, their eyes widened, and they both scolded her. Shiro didn't wait for Shin's response as he reproached her, "Have you no sense of shame? Don't you realize that your little brother worked hard to earn every penny?" Eri nodded in agreement as she fixed her disappointed gaze on Reina, saying, "Have we really spoiled you this much?" Her eyes conveyed her deep disappointment. Observing that she had garnered opposition, Reina, her eyes glistening with emotion, inquired, "What's the harm in asking? If he doesn't want to, he can simply say he's short on funds, right?" In the distance, Reina's cousins, Kazue and Etsuko, couldn't help but chuckle at Reina's spirited behavior. Shin and Myra exchanged a shared look, and Shin let out a sigh as he addressed Reina, "Big sister, you shouldn't rely too heavily on others for money. You should work hard to earn your own income." Reina glanced at Shin and snorted, retorting, "So, you're giving me a lecture now? If you don't want to give, then don't." With that, she huffed and walked away. Following this, Shiro and Eri turned to Shin with apologetic expressions. Shiro offered, "Forgive your eldest sister if she misbehaved." Eri also spoke kindly to Reina in Shin's presence, though he merely smiled and assured them that he didn't mind. Subsequently, as Sazuma Suzuki's birthday celebration drew to a close, Sazuma and Kumiko engaged in conversation with Shin and Myra, seemingly ignoring their other grandchildren. Shiro, as well as Shiro's other brothers, observed this with a solemn demeanor. The birthday celebration concluded, and Shin, Myra, and Chiko left the mansion. Sazuma and Kumiko, along with Shiro and Eri, saw them off. As Shin and Myra were on the verge of entering their car, with Chiko already seated on his motorcycle, Sazuma extended an invitation, saying, "If the three of you ever find the time, you're always welcome to visit me here." Both Shin and Chiko nodded in acknowledgement. Shin and Myra settled into the car with their pets, while Chiko, donning a helmet, mounted his motorcycle and slowly pulled away. Sazuma, Kumiko, Shiro, and Eri gazed at the receding motorcycle and Shin's car in the distance. Sazuma let out a sigh, reflecting, "Time has passed so quickly, and my fine grandsons have grown up." His wife by his side shared in his sense of nostalgia. In the midst of this, Shiro and Eri exchanged smiles. Meanwhile, in the USA, Kishan's video games were on the rise, approaching the daily sales figures of Tora 16-bit. Many players engaged in discussions about Kishan's video games. One player asserted, "I've played The Legend of Zelda, and I feel like no game can beat it for me." Another player countered, "No way. Metroid is the best, in my opinion." A newcomer chimed in, "Metroid and The Legend of Zelda? They're both great, but they can't compare to Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, or 3. They're all the best." The first two players exchanged disdainful glances in response to the new player's enthusiasm. Yet another player chuckled and remarked, "Ha ha ha! You're all playing child's games. Try playing Kid Icarus, and let's see if you can even get past the first level." Upon hearing this, the others distanced themselves from the boastful player. Kid Icarus was indeed unique but also, in their eyes, rather vexing. They were accustomed to games with save options, and needing to remember codes for it for a difficult game like Metroid was one thing, but Kid Icarus posed a different kind of challenge. They found it nearly impossible to progress past the first level, making it a polarizing addition to the Kishan gaming lineup. Meanwhile, as Kishan's growth in the USA continued to thrive, a significant challenge emerged that could either catapult Kishan to greater success or result in significant losses for Shin. Universal Studios filed a lawsuit against Kishan, claiming that Donkey Kong had infringed upon the character King Kong. The news spread through various media outlets, instantly becoming a hot topic of discussion in the USA.